Holy smokes, the last few days in America have been absolutely insane. Joining me on the podcast today from the Boston Globe, Michael Cohen. From CNN, chief business correspondent and co-anchor of Early Start, Christine Romans. And one of the hosts of a great new podcast, Election Profit Makers, the brilliant and hilarious David Rees. I'm Pete Dominick. It's time to stand up with me right now. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Monday episode, the 1st of June, or simply episode 116. Doesn't matter what time you're listening to it or when you're listening to it. I always want to talk about things that are relevant, things that matter, and try to find solutions with the best experts I can. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you for listening. And if you are paying for a paid subscription to the podcast, a lot of you have started paying more for your subscription, editing your subscription up. Thank you so much for we're almost at 600 subscribers. Very exciting. Got an awesome show for you today because I've got 3 great guests and pulled a whole bunch of audio clips. Some of them are very historical and from the past. Some of them are from the past few days that I want to play for you right here at the top. But a few things that I want to just mention. First of all, one of the best daily newsletters is from a guy named Dave Pell. Brilliant guy. It's called Next Draft. Definitely check it out. He writes, I think, at the Sunday issue, the ongoing protests following the killing of George Floyd by a white police officer who knelt on Floyd's neck for more than 8 minutes have taken place in at least 75 cities, including at the gates of the White House. By the way, the president went into the bunker, apparently, at some point in the White House, and everybody's making fun of him because he's a scaredy cat. Anyway, in the days since Floyd's death in Minneapolis, protests have broken out in 75 cities. The officer, Derek Chauvin is his name, I guess, has since been fired, arrested. His wife left him. He's being charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter. Michael Cohen, who joins me today, says this is the worst that we've seen caught on camera of instances of police brutality. Hard to argue with that. Since then, police have tear gassed protesters, drove vehicles through crowds, opened fire with rounds of rubber bullets and pepper balls on journalists and bystanders, pushed over an elderly man with a cane. Did you see that? It was walking away, shot a woman in the face with a rubber bullet as she left the grocery store, and shot a photojournalist in the eye with a rubber bullet. She's now permanently blind. I know her. Her name is Linda Turano. I'm going to reach out to her and hopefully get her to join me here at some point. Curfews have been enacted in more than 24 cities. About 5,000 National Guard troops have been activated in 15 states and D.C. Organizers have tried to keep the protests focused on police accountability and social justice through chanting and marching, but agitators posing as peaceful protesters have exploited the situation by looting stores, setting fire to buildings and police cars, throwing firecrackers, bottles, bleach, and reportedly a Molotov cocktail at police. Some advisors have urged Trump to formally address the nation and call for calm, while others have said he should condemn only the looting or risk losing middle-of-the-road voters in November. So that's Dave Pell and Next Draft. Police nationwide have responded to protests against police violence by deliberately targeting demonstrators, journalists, and bystanders with pepper spray, tear gas, rubber bullets, and excessive use of force. Did you see that guy in Salt Lake City who got out of his car with a bow and arrow? That was both hilarious and terrifying at the same time. I kind of felt bad for him because he's kind of really stupid. I mean, I'm happy they kicked the shit out of him, but still, that's a dumb guy. Who the hell is driving around with a bow and arrow and draws it on people? Real dumb guy. Anyway, former John McCain campaign manager and MSNBC contributor says, here's one police reform that should happen immediately. Policemen and women should start dressing like police again. No more BDUs, blouse combat boots, or other military accoutrements. Shoes, trousers, collared shirts. Think Mayberry, not Fallujah. Tom Ricks is a military historian who I have read and followed for a long time. I love Tom Ricks. His books about Iraq are fantastic. The war in Iraq are really well documented. But he tweeted earlier, he said, cops feel different to me today than they did before 9/11. My sense is that segments of American police have grown more authoritarian, operating in the sense that their words are commands to the public. I wonder if we are now seeing a segment of the public reject that stance. And I quoted, I said, listen, I love Tom Ricks. I love you, man. But as a military historian, you should recognize the differences. The militarization of police since 9/11. There's a great documentary about this called Do Not Resist by Craig Atkinson. Also, just read Radley Balko. Speaking of Radley Balko, he wrote a 2018 column in the Washington Post that I wanted to quote from, some of the selections of the findings and the studies that he cited that prove that the criminal justice system is biased against black citizens. He says, Radley Balko, in this 2018 column, I'll link to it in the show notes. He says black people are about twice as likely as white people to be pulled over by law enforcement for a traffic stop. Black and Latino drivers are much more likely to be searched once they are pulled over by the police. The murders of white people are more likely to be solved than the murders of black people. White people make up less than half of America's murder victims, yet 80% of the convicted murderers sentenced to death had killed a white person. Black Americans are more likely to be arrested and charged for drug-related crimes, despite no significant disparity in how much those populations actually use drugs. Potential jurors who are black are much more likely to be dismissed by prosecutors than potential white jurors. White defendants are substantially more likely than black defendants to have their most serious charge dismissed as part of a plea bargain. One more. Even when black men and white men are convicted of the same crime, the black men can expect a prison sentence that is 20% longer. The list goes on and on. Read everything that Radley Balko writes, by the way. But racial discrimination in this country has always been pervasive, especially in American criminal justice. And I thought that I could play a few clips, historical, that could represent that. I got a little Martin Luther King, I got a little James Baldwin, a little Malcolm X, and this is just some of the ones I grabbed in about an hour of looking it up that I wanted to play for you. If I'm missing some more, tell me, and I'll find them and share them on the podcast later this week. And I should also mention I've got a lot of really great guests booked, people of color, experts on these issues, going way back this week, including Tiffany Cross and Laura Coates and more. So a great week of guests coming up. Looking forward to that. But let's listen to some of these clips I have right now. First, here is the great James Baldwin talking about explaining the riots of 1968, which I'll talk with Michael Cohen about today. He wrote a whole book about it. Here's James Baldwin.
The reason that black people are in the streets has to do with the lives they're forced to lead in this country. And they're forced to lead these lives by the indifference and the apathy and a certain kind of ignorance, a very willful ignorance on the part of their co-citizens. Everybody knows, no matter what they do not know, that they wouldn't like to be a black man in this country. They know that, and they shut their minds against the rest of it, all the implications of being a black father or a black woman or a black son, and all of the implications involved in a human being's endeavor to take care of his wife, to take care of his children, to raise his children to be men and women in the teeth of a structure which is built to deny that I can be a human being or that my child can be. The great question in the country has been, all the years that I've been living here, and I was born here 43 years ago, is what does a Negro want? And this question masks a terrible knowledge. I want exactly what you want. And you know what you want. I want to be left alone. I don't want any of the things that people accuse Negroes of wanting. And I don't hate you. I simply want to be able to raise my children in peace and arrive at my own maturity in my own way, in peace. I don't want to be defined by you. I think that you and I might learn a great deal from each other if you can overcome the curtain of my color. The curtain of my color is what you use to avoid facing the facts of our common history, the facts of American life. It is easy to call me a Negro or a nigger or a promising black man, but in fact, I'm a man like you. I want to live like you. This country is mine, too. I paid as much for it as you. White means that you are European still, and black means that I'm African. And we both know, we've both been here too long. You can't go back to Ireland or Poland or England, and I can't go back to Africa. And we will live here together, or we'll die here together. It is not I am telling you. Time is telling you. You will listen or you will perish.
Powerful as always, brilliant as always, the great James Baldwin. Read everything that guy wrote. Next, I grabbed some Malcolm X. In 1962, a confrontation with the LAPD outside a mosque resulted in the death of a Nation of Islam member. It was an event seized on by an outraged Malcolm X who would condemn it in this impassioned speech.
In order for you and me to devise some kind of method or strategy to offset some of the events or repetition of the events that have taken place here in Los Angeles recently, we have to go to the root. We have to go to the cause. Dealing with the condition itself is not enough, and it is because of our effort toward getting straight to the root that people oftentimes think we're dealing in hate. We are oppressed. We are exploited. We are downtrodden. We are denied not only civil rights, but even human rights. So the only way we're going to get some of this oppression and exploitation away from us or aside from us is come together against the common enemy. Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate, you should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you? And I, for one, as a Muslim, believe that the white man is intelligent enough. If he were made to realize how black people really feel and how fed up we are without that old compromise and sweet talk. Stop sweet talking him. Tell him how you feel. Tell him what kind of hell you've been catching, and let him know that if he's not ready to clean his house up, if he's not ready to clean his house up, he shouldn't have a house. It should catch on fire and burn down.
Here's some more Malcolm X on police brutality. This is with, I think it's with Chris Wallace.
Well, this summer. An example. Commissioner Murphy. Almost every statement that Commissioner Murphy makes would give you the impression that he's encouraging the police, rank-and-file policemen, that to take whatever method or measures necessary to hold the Negroes in check. He feeds the type of statistics to the white public to make them think that Harlem is a complete criminal area, that everyone is prone toward violence. This gives the police the impression that they can then go and brutalize the Negroes or suppress the Negroes or even frighten the Negroes. Whenever something happens, 20 police cars converge on one area. This doesn't frighten Negroes. So it means that someone is either misinforming Commissioner Murphy and making him use tactics this year that he would not use 4 years ago, or that the former policeman Kennedy would not use. And this force that is so visible in the Harlem community creates a spirit of resentment in every Negro. They think they're living in a police state, and they become hostile toward the policeman. They think that the policeman is there to be against them rather than to protect them. And these thoughts, these frustrations, these apprehensions automatically are sufficient to make this make these Negroes begin to form means and ways to protect themselves in case the police themselves get too far out of line.
And now here is a brief clip from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at his I Have a Dream speech.
There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality.
Now here's one of the all-time great comedians, Chris Rock, on why cops always have to be good. There can't be bad apples, from his Netflix special, Tambourine.
I know it's hard being a cop, but some jobs, everybody got to be good. American Airlines can't be like, most of our pilots like to land.
All right, now here's a video I found on YouTube from the New York Daily News, which features a guy named Joe Crystal, whose parents were both New York Police Department officers, and he was a member of the Baltimore Police Department for several years, but his career was ruined after he informed authorities about a case of police brutality. He was tormented by threats, insults, mistreated by superiors. They ran him out on a rail, and here he is talking about that right now. Joe Crystal. This is from back in 2015.
It's all I ever wanted to do. Both my parents were New York City cops right here. Grew up in a law enforcement family. It's all I ever wanted to do. I just wanted to help people. I moved up the ranks extremely quick. When I was in the academy, I was in charge of my class. I was my class commander. Upon graduating, I received the Commissioner's Award for the trainee that exhibits the most leadership. I was the first in my class to make detective. It took me a year after I got out to make detective, and that was probably one of the most proud moments of my life. While I was there, I was working as a drug detective. Saw a guy selling drugs on the street. We went to stop him. The guy threw the drugs and ran. He was ultimately chased and kicked in the back door of a woman's home. Other cops went in, and they were able to place the guy under arrest. We secured the drugs from that he had thrown that we saw him selling. Stuff like that in Baltimore, honestly, it happens every day. It's nothing that's out of the norm or necessarily a big thing. Unfortunate thing was that this guy kicked in the back door of a woman who was the girlfriend of another cop that I didn't know personally in a different part of the city, an off-duty cop. After he was placed in our transport wagon and sent down to the city jail, the sergeant spoke to the off-duty officer. They had some sort of communication, and the sergeant on the radio called the wagon back, brought the suspect back into the house, and they brought him into a back room where he was assaulted. Ultimately, I found out later on that he had his ankle broken, and he had also said that he was assaulted and beat. At that time, all I could think about was, that as cops, we needed to, police ourselves. I didn't want to be a part of that. I didn't become a cop to get justice. Street justice. I'm sorry. I became a cop to get real justice. And, I spoke to my parents who, like I told you, were both New York City cops that night. And I tried to report about, what had happened. I didn't want to be a part of that. What happened that night was wrong, no matter how it happened. If, you had done that, if somebody else had done that, nobody would have even thought twice about taking you to jail. It's never okay to beat a handcuffed suspect. We're supposed to uphold the law. I tried to report it that night and was told that if I snitched about what happened, that it would be the end of my career. After that, it was like a roller coaster that I just couldn't get off of. I had to deal with, being called a snitch and a rat by sergeants and other officers. I had multiple times I called for backup, and nobody came to back me up, in dangerous situations, chasing a felony drug suspect. Nobody from my squad told me they didn't want to ride with me because I talked about what had happened. I had a sergeant call me and threaten me at my house and tell me I better pray to God I'm not the star witness. Somebody placed a dead rat of mine on my wife's car. It kept going even from there. I was moved around to the point where I didn't even know where I was supposed to be going to work. I didn't know where I was reporting on a daily basis. It just got to the point where I couldn't do my job. The badge I had didn't mean anything. I was being told, hey, for the next 12 hours, I need you to stare at this alley, and I need you to tell me, if anybody tries to rob or break into any of these houses, or stare at this trail and see if anybody comes up this trail for the next 8 hours, The badge didn't mean anything at that point because I wasn't in a position to help anybody because I just wasn't even being allowed to. So I ended up making a decision to leave the police department ultimately and give up my childhood dream of being a cop.
I believe that kind of behavior, that kind of culture is endemic in police departments all over this country. I'd love to be proven wrong. But that's why I always say it's not just a few bad apples. It's the culture of policing. It's after the academy, they tell you to throw everything you just learned out. Forget all that political correctness. This is how you be a cop. Let's go knock some heads in. Let's go give some people some rough rides. Let's be tough guys. I mean, it's hard for me to believe otherwise. And I've heard that kind of thing quite a bit. And we've all seen these documentaries. We've all heard these anecdotes, these stories that if you snitch, you are out. So if there's only a few bad apples, then what about the rest of the police officers who aren't turning those bad apples in? Well, that's what happens too often when you do. Now I want to play for you the mayor of Atlanta, black woman named Keisha Lance Bottoms. She delivered a very emotional speech on the unrest in Atlanta a couple of nights ago, addressing the city over the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Here's Atlanta Mayor Keisha Bottoms, and I think I cut off the first couple words where she said, I am the mother to
4 black children in America, one of whom is 18 years old. And when I saw the murder of George Floyd, I hurt like a mother would hurt. And on yesterday, when I heard there were rumors about violent protests in Atlanta, I did what a mother would do. I called my son and I said, where are you? I said, I cannot protect you and black boys shouldn't be out today. So you're not going to out-concern me and out-care about where we are in America. I wear this each and every day. And I pray over my children each and every day. So what I see happening on the streets of Atlanta is not Atlanta. This is not a protest. This is not in the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr. This is chaos. A protest has purpose. When Dr. King was assassinated, we didn't do this to our city. So if you love this city that has had a legacy of black mayors and black police chiefs and people who care about this city, where more than 50% of the business owners in Metro Atlanta are minority business owners. If you care about this city, then go home. And pray that somebody like Reverend Beasley will come and talk to you and give you some instructions on what a protest should look like and how you effectuate change in America. This police chief made a video on yesterday, pull it up on YouTube, where she said she was appalled to watch the murder of George Floyd. This woman did that. You're not honoring the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement. You're not protesting anything, running out with brown liquor in your hands, breaking windows in this city. T.I. and Killer Mike own half the West Side. So when you burn down this city, you're burning down our community. If you want change in America, go and register to vote. Show up at the polls on June 9th. Do it in November. That is the change we need in this country. You are disgracing our city. You are disgracing the life of George Floyd and every other person who has been killed in this country. We are better than this. We're better than this as a city. We are better than this as a country. Go home. Go home. In the same way I couldn't protect my son on yesterday, I cannot protect you out in those streets. You're throwing knives at our police officers. You are burning cars. You have defaced the CNN building. Ted Turner started CNN in Atlanta 40 years ago because he believed in who we are as a city. There was a black reporter who was arrested on camera this morning who works for CNN. They are telling our stories, and you are disgracing their building. This is not the legacy of civil rights in America. This is chaos, and we're buying into it. This won't change anything. We're no longer talking about the murder of an innocent man. We're talking about how you're burning police cars on the streets of Atlanta, Georgia. Go home.
Whoo, that was a barn burner of a speech. Very passionate, very honest, very real. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Bottoms. And she mentioned her police chief. Here is her police chief, Erica Shields, who is a white woman, taking questions from reporters.
As far as the situation in Minnesota, as far as the officers, the knee into the throat, the suspect and dying, do you have any response on that?
Oh, it's horrific. It is absolutely horrific. This isn't, to me, it's not about policing. This is about what are you as a human being? I mean, that is like, how have you stooped so low? It is appalling. And I'm at a loss of words to explain how these fellow officers could stand around and watch this. Mm-hmm. There is no explanation for this. And I think that what you're going to see now is you're going to see the public, and rightly so, saying, okay, well, had John Doe done this, John Doe would be in handcuffs. One of these officers is going to be in handcuffs. It's indefensible. But in saying that, I think it's also important to say there's a lot of good cops in the Minneapolis PD. The chief, Rondo, is a friend of mine. He's had his hands full. He came in tasked with cleaning up a department, and he's had his hands full. And I think it's important not to use a broad brush and just assume that everyone thinks and agrees with that. But in terms of those 4 officers, I don't know how they're going to live with themselves. I really don't.
Alrighty, and as far as Atlanta goes, what do you have in place? I mean, as far as the environment here that protects our citizens from things like that?
Well, allow me to say this. That technique is not trained by APD or by the state, but I'd be surprised if Minneapolis is training on that technique. So that's always, as a law enforcement agency, the first thing you need to do is go to your academy and say, what are we training on? And make sure that there's not something there that you just did not realize. The other thing we did, we immediately yesterday, we took the video and we play that frame by frame for our recruits to show them how not to do it, to show the consequences of their actions, and to make them understand even better with greater clarity what their role is, not just as the arresting officer, but as the officer who is standing by to intervene and stop such egregious behavior. So I think that, but it's not, obviously it's not good, but what it also does is, that the communities in Atlanta are looking at this and saying, wait a minute, this could be my son, my brother, my uncle. And so it puts an added burden on law enforcement across the country when something this egregious is committed, an act this egregious is committed by another law enforcement agency, for sure.
And let's stay in Atlanta, where we also heard a couple nights ago from activist, artist, actor, prominent member of the Atlanta Society, Killer Mike, who delivered a really emotional and impassioned speech at the mayor's press conference. And he stood there in front of Mayor Keisha Bottoms and the chief of police, who I just played for you. And this is well worth it. If you already heard it, you can skip ahead about 7 minutes, but this is worth every word.
I'm the son of an Atlanta City police officer. My cousin is an Atlanta City police officer, and my other cousin, East Point police officer. And I got a lot of love and respect for police officers, down to the original 8 police officers in Atlanta that even after becoming police had to dress in a YMCA because white officers didn't want to get dressed with niggers. And here we are 80 years later. I watched a white officer assassinate a black man. And I know that tore your heart out. And I know it's crippling. And I have nothing positive to say in this moment, because I don't want to be here. But I'm responsible to be here because it wasn't just Dr. King and people dressed nicely who marched and protested to progress this city and so many other cities. It was people like my grandmother, people like my aunts and uncles who were members of SCLC and NAACP, and in particular, Reverend James Orange, Mrs. Alice Johnson, and Reverend Love, who we just lost last year. So I'm duty-bound to be here to simply say that it is your duty not to burn your own house down for anger with an enemy. It is your duty to fortify your own house so that you may be a house of refuge in times of organization. And now is the time to plot, plan, strategize, organize, and mobilize. It is time to beat up prosecutors you don't like at the voting booth. It is time to hold mayoral offices accountable, chiefs and deputy chiefs. Atlanta is not perfect, but we're a lot better than we ever were, and we're a lot better than cities are. I'm mad as hell. I woke up wanting to see the world burn down yesterday because I'm tired of seeing black men die. He casually put his knee on a human being's neck for 9 minutes as he died like a zebra in the clutch of a lion's jaw. And we watch it like murder porn over and over again. So that's why children are burning to the ground. They don't know what else to do. And it is the responsibility of us to make this better right now. We don't want to see one officer charged. We want to see 4 officers prosecuted and sentenced. We don't want to see targets burning. We want to see the system that sets up for systemic racism burnt to the ground. And as I sit here in Georgia, home of Stevens, Georgia, former vice president of the Confederacy, white man said that law, fundamental law, stated that whites were naturally the superior race, and the Confederacy was built on a cornerstone. It's called a cornerstone speech. Look it up. The cornerstone speech that blacks would always be subordinate. That officer believed that speech because he killed that man like an animal. In this city, officers have done horrendous things and they have been prosecuted. This city's cut different. In this city, you can find over 50 restaurants owned by black women. I didn't say minority, and I didn't say women of color. So after you burn down your own home, what do you have left but char and ash? CNN? Ted did a great thing. I love CNN, I love Cartoon Network, but I'd like to say to CNN right now, karma's a mother. Stop feeding fear and anger every day. Stop making people feel so fearful. Give them hope. I'm glad they only took down a sign and defaced a building and they're not killing human beings like that policeman did. I'm glad that they only destroyed some brick and mortar and they didn't rip a father from a son. They didn't rip a son from a mother like the policeman did. When a man yells for his mother in duress and pain and she's dead, he is essentially yelling, please, God, don't let it happen to me. And we watch that. So my question for us on the other side of this camera is, after it burns, will we be left with charred, or will we rise like a phoenix out of the ashes that Atlanta has always done? Will we use this as a moment to say that we will not do what other cities have done, and in fact, we will get better than we've been? We got good enough to destroy cash bonds. You don't have to worry about going to jail for something petty. We got smart enough to decriminalize marijuana. How smart are we going to be in the next 15 or 20 years to keep us ahead of this curve? So that much like when South Africa suffered apartheid, you had Andy and other politicians that could make sure that Atlanta said, Coca-Cola, we love you, but if you don't pull out of South Africa, we're going to leave. We're not going to drink Coca-Cola anymore. Coca-Cola jumped on their side and apartheid ended. So we have an opportunity now. Because I'm mad, I don't have any good advice. But what I can tell you is that if you sit in your homes tonight, instead of burning your home to the ground, you will have time to properly plot, plan, strategize, and organize and mobilize in an effective way. And two of the most effective ways is first taking your butt to the computer and making sure you fill out your sentences so that people know who you are and where you are. The next thing is making sure you exercise your political bully power and going to local elections and beating up the politicians that you don't like. You got a prosecutor sent your partner to jail and you know it was bullshit, put a new prosecutor in there. Now's your election to do it. You want a different senator that's more progressive, that promotes marijuana through, now is the time to do that. But it is not time to burn down your own home. I love and I respect you. I hate I don't have more to say. I hate I can't fix it in a snap. I hate Atlanta's not perfect for as good as we are. But we have to be better than this moment. We have to be better than burning down our own homes. Because if we lose Atlanta, what else we got? We lose an ability to plot, to plan, to strategize, to organize, and to properly mobilize. I want you to go home. I want you to talk to 10 of your friends. I want you guys to come up with real solutions. I would like for the Atlanta City Police Department to bring back the Community Review Board, one that Alice Johnson was formerly under Chief Turner. We need a review board here ahead of it before an officer does some stupid shit. We need to get ahead of it. That's my recommendation to my mayor and my chief. Let's get a review board. Let's get ahead of it, and let's give them power. We don't need an officer that makes a mistake once, twice, 3 times, and finally he kills a boy on national TV, and the next thing you know, the country is burning down. We don't need a dumbass president repeating what segregation has said. When you start looting, we start shooting. But the problem is some officers black and some people gonna shoot back. And that's not good for our community either. I love and respect you all. I hope that we find a way out of it because I don't have the answers, but I do know we must plot. We must plan, we must strategize, organize, and mobilize. Thank you for allowing me some time to speak. I'd like to appreciate our chief for what she said on YouTube. I thought it was very bold to do. I'd like to appreciate our mayor for talking to us like a black mama and telling us to take our ass at home. And I'd like to thank my friend for convincing me to come here. And I'll defer to Joe Beasley now because he knows a hell of a lot more than we do. Thank y'all.
Here now is George Floyd's brother, Philonise Floyd, on MSNBC's show with Reverend Al Sharpton.
Yes, sir. They all need to be convicted of first-degree murder and given the death penalty because they didn't care about what they wanted to do with my brother. He wasn't a person to them. He was scum. He was nothing. And I can imagine how many people they did like that. I don't need them on the streets to kill anybody else. I'm hurt. My family is hurt. His kids are hurt. They will grow up without a father. Everybody is crying and in pain right now. So if they can do anything, please arrest those other officers and give them murder one.
Let me ask you this. It has not been asked of you. You spoke to both President Trump and the family spoke with former Vice President Biden. What did you say to them?
I asked Vice President Biden, and I never had to beg a man before, but I asked him, could he please get justice for my brother? Please, because I need it. I do not want to see him on a shirt just like the other guys. Nobody deserved that. Black folks don't deserve that. We all dying. We're all dying. Black lives matter. We need it. It's pain, and we're fueled by pain right now. And we should just be peaceful, but it's hard right now.
What was the conversation with President Trump like?
It was so fast. He didn't give me the opportunity to even speak. It was hard. I was trying to talk to him, but he just kept, pushing me off, I don't want to hear what you're talking about. And I just told him I want justice. I said that I couldn't believe that they committed a modern-day lynching in broad daylight. I can't stand for that. Yeah. I can't. And it hurt me, And I just don't understand, man. Why we got to go through this? Why we got to have all this pain, man? I love my brother. I'm never going to see him again.
Let me, Brandon, as you comfort your father. I'll come back to you. Let me go.
Well, that was absolutely heart-wrenching, but I wanted you to hear it because it was real and it was emotional, and I heard it, and it really spoke to me. But that was pretty amazing. Lastly, let me go to Tiffany Cross, who will be my guest on this show tomorrow. At least she's scheduled to be. I love this woman. She's a fantastic commentator, writer, speaker. She's got a new book coming out. She was on MSNBC over the weekend and was asked about what President Trump, you think he might do, what we expect he would do, and, well, what he did. Here's Tiffany.
No, it wouldn't. And I would take a bit of an issue, Yasmin, and say that everyone was not expecting this president to address this nation and the racial inequality that has historically plagued this country. I think we got exactly what we expected. This is not the first time that Donald Trump has fallen short of being a leader. He has routinely called for violence and stoked the racial tensions in this country, even as far back as on the campaign trail. In 2016, he encouraged people to behave violently. He encouraged someone, if you see them about to throw a tomato, knock the hell out of them. He encouraged police violence. He encouraged people to commit violence at his rallies. We saw even one of the MAGA attendees sucker punched an attendee. And so, and recently in an interview with Breitbart, he suggested that the people with guns are all on his side, the military, the police, the bikers. So I don't think that America expects anything from Donald Trump other than what we have routinely gotten. I think it's been an unfortunate characterization and attempt by a lot of people in the in some certain mainstream media outlets to normalize this kind of asinine and violent behavior. And that's one of the things that has to stop. And that's been something that has plagued this country since 1619. And so it is a bit frustrating, Yasmin. I'll tell you, when I routinely hear well-intentioned people say, this is not who we are. These type of violent revolutions are as American as apple pie and as old as the Battle of Jamestown. And until we stop perpetuating a false narrative about who this country is and confront the reality about historic white supremacy systems that have helped get us here, I'm afraid to see that history will continue to repeat itself.
All right, well, there you go, an audio roundup of a number of different perspectives on these issues that we're seeing play out in America. And let's now get to my first guest. Enough blabbering from me. I want to bring to you my conversation with Boston Globe's Michael Cohen, who I talked about comparisons between now and 1968. He's been covering the protests in Brooklyn. We always have a great conversation. Here he is at Speech Boy 71. Michael Cohen, columnist at the Boston Globe. Okay, I've got the great Michael Cohen right now, and he's just come back up to his apartment in Brooklyn, New York, where you were down covering, trying to get some shots of protests. What's happening in Brooklyn tonight, Sunday, and over the weekend, Michael?
You know, it's interesting. I'd heard that the major demonstration was going to be in Manhattan, but I went down. I saw some pictures on Twitter. And it was, just really thousands of people. It was a lot of people, more than I've seen a demonstration in a very long time, marching down Flatbush Avenue, which is in the heart of downtown Brooklyn. And it was huge. People were marching. Some marched over the Manhattan Bridge, which connects to Flatbush. Some people marched back down the street. Some people marched a different direction. A lot of support from people in cars. People on the sidewalks. It was very peaceful and sort of impressive, actually. And the cops, police officers NYPD did not interfere, didn't really respond to them at all, even though they were definitely being provoked, definitely being taunted. But they kept their cool, and from what I saw at least, it was a pretty, as it should be, a demonstration. People making their voices heard, and the police not getting in the way of it. Keeping the peace, but also not getting in the way and letting people demonstrate.
What do you think is the story? Violent protesters or police violence? The protesters are protesting. People are in the streets as a result of the death of George Floyd. And obviously there were others before him boiling up. Ahmaud Arbery, this EMT in Louisville, whose name is escaping me. Forgive me. What do you think it is? The protesters or the police violence?
Well, I don't know that it's either or. I think I'll be honest with you. I think that, social media, I think, kind of distorts a lot of what we're seeing here. Yes, there was this thing last night about, a couple NYPD cruisers, literally they were running over protesters. It was pretty awful. What I saw tonight, was pretty reasonable the behavior of the police. And I'm sure in a lot of places the police are behaving responsibly, but I'm sure in a lot of places too, you have bad apples. You have people, police departments that they're adopting the wrong strategies and the wrong tactics. I think you saw this in Minneapolis yesterday, people firing, tear gas at people who were unarmed, people who were not posing any kind of a threat. So it's hard to say, because I think that we're getting a distorted view by these clips that we see on the news. I don't know what's happening, every city in America. I don't happen every place in America. I also think that, some of these demonstrations are we may be getting a wrong impression of how big these really are. I mean, the one I saw today was pretty huge, but I've talked to people who were in LA who said the demonstrations were actually pretty small, and they were contained to a pretty small area of the city. So I think it's possible that, we're seeing this stuff magnified on social media, and it may not be what really is happening on the ground. I do think, a lot of these protesters seem very peaceful to me. And there certainly seem to be a small percentage of folks who are agitating and who are acting irresponsibly and acting violently, and they're precipitating these kinds of police responses.
So I wanted to ask you, of course, about 1968, because you wrote an entire awesome book about it, American Maelstrom, and everybody should get Michael's book because it's now more relevant. Well, it's very relevant. A lot of people you're seeing compare what is happening right now to what happened in 1968. And I think you're the guy to talk to about this. American Maelstrom, the 1968 election and the politics of division. What, if anything, are the similarities? There was a lot of chaos then. There's a lot of chaos now. We've got the economy and the pandemic. Then they had the Vietnam War and assassinations. Well, look,
one of the downsides of writing a book about 1968 is that you constantly feel the need to correct inappropriate historical analogies of 68. It's a weird thing that I feel like I have to do all the time.
Good. Well, I'm glad that we have you to do it.
And so when I remember in 2016, you saw a lot of these analogies being made, and I was sort of like, no, this is not like 68 at all. I think, there are similarities to 68 and today, but I think they're sort of few and far between. In fact, I think the differences are actually much more profound and important. I think the first thing is that these demonstrations you're seeing are pretty unprecedented. We haven't seen like this in a long time in this country of just these kind of protests around the country. And frankly, I think it's become something much bigger than George Floyd. I think it's become something about dissatisfaction with status quo, dissatisfaction with political leadership. I think frustration over, people being stuck inside for the last 2 or 3 months with the quarantine. So I think it's a combination of factors. It's nothing like what was happening in the 60s. Nothing. I think back at like Watts went on for, the riots in the Watts neighborhood of LA went on for almost a week. You had dozens of people who were killed, thousands of buildings destroyed and damaged. And, that happened pretty much every single year between 64 and 68. It happened in Harlem also in 64. It happened in Cleveland. It happened in 67, the long hot summer of 67. You had major riots in Newark and in Detroit. Detroit was so bad they had to call in the 82nd 101st Airborne to patrol the streets of the city. In 68, the riots that took place after the assassination of Martin Luther King was the most sustained period of violence in America since the Civil War. We've seen nothing like that in the past several days. I mean, we've seen violence that we haven't seen at this level, I think, probably since the riots of 92 in LA. But as far as nationwide, it's been a long time since anything like this. But it still isn't on a level we saw in 68. I think we should be careful with those kinds of analogies from that perspective. I also think the big difference between now and 68, and that's the point I always make to people, is that, the kind of violence you saw in 68 was political violence. It wasn't just violence as far as, rising crime rates, which went up, by the way, every year in the 60s and reached sort of epidemic proportions by the late 60s, which is not happening today. I always to remind people of this, and for me, I wasn't born in 68. I wasn't around then. And I always struggled to capture in the book, just how chaotic that year was. But just think for a second that, in March of 68, Gene McCarthy almost wins the New Hampshire primary. Bobby Kennedy gets in the race a couple of days later. 10 days later, LBJ drops out of the presidential race with literally no one knew he was planning to do this. Maybe 10 people knew that he was planning to do this. Tacked it on the end of a speech on Vietnam. So that happens, gives this momentary blip of hope for the country. And then 4 days later, MLK is assassinated in Memphis. And then you have the riots that took place after that. And then 2 months later, Bobby Kennedy was shot. The brother of Jack Kennedy had been shot, of course, 5 years before that. And many Americans, I think, saw and fully process what happened with Jack Kennedy. So you think about that level of political violence and chaos and dysfunctionality, it's on a level that I don't think we've reached today. I think what's different today is the political leadership that we have, and that we have a president who seems intent on throwing gasoline on the fire in a way that I find sort of, I have struggled with the words for it. I mean, it's crazy the way that he is literally seeming to egg on the protesters and to egg on the police to respond to the protesters with, force, extreme force. And so I think that's a huge difference. I think the other big difference is your president who doesn't care about democracy and is waging, frankly, a daily assault on democratic freedoms in this country, democratic institutions in this country. I think that's a key difference we did not have in 68. We had at least a series of leaders who at least understood, or at least, considered somewhat important, adhering to these democratic norms. We don't have that today.
Well, what about all the people who are pointing to, how this could help the incumbent president? Violent protests. People are saying give Trump a chance to be, again, the law and order candidate that he ran as in 2016. And the rioting could rebound to help President Trump in 2020, just like it helped Richard Nixon in 1968. That's another take.
Well, I mean, it's a really bad take, and I've seen it take a lot, and it sort of makes me crazy because, first of all, I don't really think Trump ran on a law and order campaign in 2016. He ran on more Hillary Clinton's a crook, and I'm a racist, and so are you. It's a little simplistic.
Yeah, no.
But not completely. Right. I mean, he ran on a race-based platform, which is a lot of what law and order is. But I would make this point, and I think it's really important to understand this. I made this point over and over again. In 1968, law and order was a political issue because law and order was an issue, and a legitimate issue, and an important issue. Crime had increased dramatically in the 1960s. If you weren't talking about crime in 1968, then you had no business running for political office. I mean, you just didn't. It doesn't mean that Richard Nixon didn't, use law and order as a way to in a racial manner. He did, although not to the extent that people, I think that he did. But it's completely different than today, in which there is not, crime rates are really relatively low, much lower than they were in 68. But the biggest problem with this thing about what's going to help Trump, Trump's the incumbent. Trump is the incumbent. Nixon was the challenger in 68, right? The violence in 68, rebounded against Democrats because they were the incumbent party, and people blamed them for the violence. Okay. There is this notion out there that when riots happen and there's mayhem, that people are going to vote for Republicans. I suppose there's some argument for that, but the more reasonable argument is that the party in power tends to be the one that gets punished when this kind of thing happens. And frankly, in 1992, the last time we had major riots in this country in L.A., that was a Republican president. It did not help him, right? It didn't help H.W. Bush at all. And I would be surprised if it helped Trump. If anything, I think it more likely will hurt Trump, because it will say to people, they will say he is responsible for this, or that somehow he has caused this, or he is the person, it's happening on his watch. Right. That would be historically, I think, more accurate than to say, riots are going to help Republicans.
So, yeah, you make a lot of historical points right there. I also wanted to ask you, you're a journalist. You've covered all kinds of events, including a whole bunch of Trump rallies during the campaign. And I mean, is it different, and how impactful is it what we're seeing in terms of reporters being arrested, reporters being shot? Young woman who actually know, Linda Toronto in Minnesota, lost an eye. We saw the CNN reporter get arrested. We saw my friend Ali Velshi get shot by rubber bullets. They've been tear gassed. The attack on the press seems to be, I don't want to say unprecedented because I have no idea about history, but it seems very extreme. It seems to be repeated in different cities across the country. And they seem to be somewhat unabashed, the police officers, when they go after people with press badges. What do you make of that?
It's hard to – I have a hard time with this because, again, you're seeing some snapshot stuff. I don't know what to make of it. But I will say this. I mean, some of the videos I saw, you had press clearly identifying themselves as reporters. I mean, this thing in with these CNN guys who were arrested, like what the hell? I guess the statement after the fact was that we didn't know they were cops. So I didn't know they were reporters. They're holding cameras and microphones. They get press credentials. Like, what is the confusion here? I guess the one thing you do wonder about is do you have people who were so sympathetic with Trump, who view the media as the enemy of the people, and think that they now have carte blanche to take a pot shot at reporters? I don't know. I mean, I don't know, but you make a good point. It's happening in places, not just one or two times. It's happened about at least 6, 7, 8 times we've seen in the last couple of days, and it seems in ways where they're being the fact that they're identifying as reporters is being ignored by the police. And I don't want to sit here and denigrate every police force in the country, but that this kind of thing is happening suggests to me that you may have cops out there who may be saying, that they agree with Trump and the president of the people, and they want to get back at them somehow. Get back at me, get back at us, all of us. I mean, I think that's kind of where the attitude comes right here is, and I worry about that. I mean, I think every reporter has to worry about that. I mean, the idea that a reporter would be arrested while on the air. That's insane. That is really insane. And a cop who does that should be fired. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and then that was the
never be happening.
Minnesota State Police apparently that was responsible for that. And and the craziest thing about that was like, well, once we confirmed he was a reporter, then we let him go. And it's like, I try to give him the benefit of the doubt. It's even a press badge could be forged, and a camera doesn't mean you're necessarily press, but. If he's on CNN Live, you can just turn on CNN before you arrest him and embarrass yourself and potentially put your own self in danger. I mean, your own job in danger. Yeah. Stupid.
Listen, I agree with you. And this thing I saw, I think it was in Louisville, of this reporter like sort of walking out with a camera and a yellow vest and being shot at directly by a police. That looked purposeful to me. It really did. And again, I don't know. I wasn't there. I can't say. I mean, look, these cops are under a lot of stress. I mean, I get it. But still, this is happening in too many places for me to think it's just a coincidence.
Right. What do you think of the president's tweet about designated Antifa as a terrorist organization? What do you think about the guy who pulled out the bow and arrow also? Did you see that video?
I did see that video.
I felt bad.
Jesus
I felt
Christ.
bad for him. He seemed like he was a dumb person. I watched an interview.
I'm glad how do you really feel?
I'm glad they kicked the shit out of him. I'm glad they took him down. But he talked like a very dumb person. And also he had a bow and an arrow, and he pulled it out and pointed it at people. And I don't think I've ever seen that anywhere.
That was
cameras
a first
everywhere, and no one is catching anybody with a bow and an arrow. And it didn't even look like he was strong enough to pull the bull back. So
you don't see that every day. And I guess the betting odds in Vegas for a guy with a crossbow is what we probably should be putting our money on.
Crossbow is a lot more, efficient.
Yeah. No, that was insane. But the Antifa
that was in
thing,
Salt Lake City.
That was Salt Lake City of all places, right?
Oh.
No, but the Antifa thing, like this isn't even an organization. It doesn't even exist. It's like a movement.
Right.
It's like I'm gonna declare, Black Lives. They're actually an organization. can't even use them as an analogy. It's the dumbest thing.
They don't have a leader. They haven't killed anybody.
No.
I saw Clint Watts. You know who Clint Watts is?
Yeah, sure.
He had a great tweet thread about Antifa. And he says, for years, I conducted exercises for cops to evaluate extremist threats in their jurisdiction. First decade, it was Al-Qaeda, ISIS, mix of domestic and international. Last 3 years, Antifa suddenly became the #1 threat for majority class. Some in the classes from major cities had never heard of it. I was confused. We'd nearly always just seen ISIS or white supremacists attack on the news. I'd ask, who's the leader of Antifa? No answer. When was the last time someone from Antifa killed someone? Silence. Usually amounted to vague recollection of property damage might be Antifa. It's nuts.
It's nuts. But again, this is something that the right has glommed onto.
Yeah.
Whenever these demonstrations happen, and I saw a lot of people. I mean, people saying, People think like when Trump announced this thing on Twitter, people saying, "Yeah, it's about time." But about time it doesn't even exist. It's like it's again, it's just become a talking point for the right and a way for them to demonize the left and say the left is is violent and is, whenever these demonstrations happen, of finding some way of finding a boogeyman, and that's what this basically is. I think it's ridiculous.
Where
like
are
most
you,
things the president tweets.
Where are you on fascism?
I am anti-fascism. That's going to be my general point of view. I am anti-fascist.
I'm on the fence.
Not a fan.
I'm on the
fence.
I think there's some good things. I think there's been
you don't like the killing, but you do like the trans running.
I think some of the policies, some of the former fascist leaders. When I first met my wife's grandfather in Sicily years ago, he's long passed, unfortunately, but I'll never forget, George W. Bush was on TV. I'm in Sicily watching the Italian news, and Bush comes on, and even though he knows, I'm American, he doesn't know anything about my politics, he can't even speak the same language, he just starts screaming, "Bush is a fascista! Bush is a fascista!" And I was like, well, you would know one. You worked for Mussolini. So. There
you go. Exactly. There you go.
The president gave a press conference, I think it was on Friday, where he didn't even talk about, it's my understanding, I didn't watch the whole thing because I had to clip my nails, but he didn't even, as my understanding, he didn't even talk about the police violence, the protests. He stuck to China, and I forget what else he was talking about. But
it's mostly China. Oh, the WHO.
Yes, the WHO, which is a huge announcement.
Yeah.
Pulling out of...
Stupid. Incredibly stupid.
Why?
You're going to pull out of the World Health Organization in the middle of a global pandemic? Really? And by the way, why is he doing this? Because he wants to find a scapegoat for his own failures when it comes to dealing with the coronavirus. That's what this basically is. The same thing as the China bashing. I mean, this guy is willing to to harm an organization that has played a critically important role in global health over the past several decades. He's willing to screw up relationships, well, what's left of the relationship with China, make it much worse, all to basically, bail himself out of being responsible for what happened with this virus. I mean, every day that he remains in office, he is doing untold damage to this country. I mean, in ways that just... It's almost impossible to comprehend all the ways of doing it. And it's all about his ego. This Twitter announcement last week, I don't know if you saw this executive order about Twitter.
I don't understand.
Twitter.
I'm very confused. I mean, Twitter started fact checking his tweets, and then
fact checked his tweet.
And then when he made a violent threat, and the White House, Twitter account retweeted it, said they flagged him for inciting violence, which is another rule. So Twitter seems to finally be catching up to the rest of us in 2015 on his violent tweets and so on. But his reaction was confusing only because, they have been complaining for years that Twitter wanted to censor people. It's just, now he's telling Twitter I don't know. It seems like very much against what conservatives have been saying for years. For the president.
You would think, yes. But I think the thing that's interesting to me is that he basically they flag this tweet as being, saying it was about mail-in ballots. So here's the truth about mail-in ballots.
Right.
He had a hissy fit, temper tantrum over this, and says, I want an executive order. And what happens then is that the White House then mobilizes to basically pacify his temper tantrum and come up with this executive order that is a joke, that if you even read it, was basically all about the fact that he's upset about, they put a thing on his tweet. And now is how policy gets made. The president has a temper tantrum, and that's how we make policy. And the attorney general, who is literally, I'm not going to use, I'm trying to keep it clean, but is just a horrible, horrible human being, is standing next to him when he signs this ridiculous executive order. Ridiculous that, as you said it correctly, every conservative should be outraged by. The idea that the president of the United States is going to go after a private company and try to shut it down because they said things about him that he doesn't like. What happened to conservatives being upset about the overweening power of government?
It's not even that. They're not saying things about him they didn't like. They're saying he can't incite violence, and he can't say horrible things that they're not saying anything about him. They're saying you can't say those things.
Yeah.
So it's not. Also,
but I'll be honest with you. Twitter. Look, they did the right thing finally, but the honest fact. I mean, look, they're in an impossible position, and I do sort of feel a little bit sorry because they're in this position of like, it's very hard to shut the president's Twitter feed down because he's president of the United States, right? How do you justify doing that? But the reality is that Trump has been pushing, has violated the guide. I mean, they like literally, listen, it was this week. Nobody even talks about it. He flagged somebody who works at Twitter, who's I guess a Democrat, who is responsible for the various what's it called, protocols they have for when people get suspended or when tweets get taken down. And he flagged him personally and encouraged people to sort of go after him. He basically doxed the guy at Twitter who is trying to flag these tweets.
Yeah,
I mean that should lead to his account being suspended. It really should. And of course they're not going to do it because he's the president of the United States. But the reality is, like, a long time ago, this guy's Twitter account was taken away from him. And what is amazing about this is that, I mean, he's an adult. Like theoretically, he's an adult.
Yeah, not really. That doesn't act like
nobody. Yeah, not really, right? But nobody around him can say, "Dude, stop tweeting. Enough already." It's like he is like a child who no one ever says no to. Ever.
Yeah, well, anybody that said no to him, even slightly, has been dismissed. That's been, right. That doesn't get covered. Like, I feel like, no, you should write that column. I'll tell you what columns to write.
Thank you.
If you need anything, I'm here. You write write a journal entry about me. No, just the idea that there were some quote adults in the room. I'm thinking of, and it's hard to say, but even like McMaster or even Gary Cohen or anybody that was in the room, the former DNI. I mean, anybody that carried over, and they said to him anything from "you can't do that, it wouldn't be smart politically" to "you can't do that, it's illegal." They're gone. Yeah. He dismisses him. He does not allow anybody to say no, to be critical of him, and including his campaign people. I mean, he just dismisses everybody. I'd love to see people go through that timeline of him dismissing anybody who was critical or said no. And people are terrified working in administration to say no.
They don't. And what rather than say no, they enable it. Like on this Twitter thing, they basically say, "Oh, okay, fine. You have a temper tantrum." Instead of saying, "Mr. President, no, we can't do this." They say, "Okay, how do we do this? How do we rationalize your behavior?" That's what they're doing.
Let me ask you one more thing, which is about, I think it was Friday when we saw finally the Michael Flynn Russian ambassador conversation transcripts that both Republicans and Democrats said when they were released, they would be proven right. Who was proven right once we saw these transcripts?
Not Mike Flynn. I mean, okay, so this story I can't even with anymore. But what was so fascinating about this was Bill Barr, the horrible person that he is, gets on TV and says, he read the transcript. There's nothing wrong with it. Those kind of conversations are routine. They happen all the time. With incoming administrations. First of all, that's not really true. Most people coming in, they go out of the way not to interfere with the current, president's foreign policy. But the second more important point is, if that's true, why did he lie to the FBI about it? Why? He lied to the FBI. The call was just routine. There's nothing to it. It's no big deal. Why did he lie about it? He lied about it because it wasn't routine.
Right. Because
he did something wrong. He knew he did something wrong. That's why he lied. And it's just like you read the transcript and these guys just interfered in the election. They just got sanctions put on them. And he's saying, "Oh, don't worry about it. We won't. We're going to, just don't escalate. So we have to do something forward. We're going to let this whole thing go." To a country that just interfered in the U.S. presidential election. I mean, how is that in any way appropriate for a incoming national security advisor to do? It's crazy. And frankly, like, again, I go back to what I said before. The guy lied about this. He lied. They specifically asked him, "Did you discuss the sanctions with the Russian ambassador to the United States?" "No, I did not," he said. That was a lie. He did discuss it. The transcript. I mean, this guy, honestly, it's unbelievable. I mean, all these people, they're shameless. They're absolutely shameless. I mean, I can't. And these people who defend Flynn. I mean,
yeah. Do you know that Eli Lake fella?
oh my God.
What's his deal? I had him on the show years ago, and then he just seems crazy.
I mean,
with his takes. Yeah, he's a Bloomberg columnist. For those people who don't know, look him up.
Yes, and he's a pretty conservative guy, and he's not the most pleasant person on social media.
Right.
And I usually don't get involved in it, but like I almost want. I was a tweet out like I want to pour one out for Eli Lake because clearly this, and he's even after it came out,
he was still
defending his argument.
Yeah, it's bad. It's very bad. Pour one out for Eli Lake. That's funny.
I mean, God.
Hey, do you remember all the way back on Thursday when your weekly newsletter, Truth and Consequences, come out, and you were talking about the number of coronavirus deaths? Do you remember that? It was 4 years ago.
I wrote a column this weekend about how awful it is that no one talks about, that we've lost.
Can you believe, like, it was story number one for months. There was a vacuum of all other important issues until, the killing of George Floyd, and I think it's not just George Floyd. It was Ahmaud Arbery. It was the EMT in Louisville, whose name I just looked up, and now I've forgotten again. I got to find her name right now and say her name. But now this is the top story for the past couple of days, and I mean, a lot of it is because you're seeing these videos of cops kicking the shit out of people all over the country as a result of people protesting cops killing people. I mean, it's.
But let me say actually one thing about this that's maybe a more positive note. That the one thing I was struck by with the response to George Floyd killing is that
Breonna Taylor in Louisville.
Breonna Taylor, yes,
sorry,
Breonna Taylor.
Go ahead.
That in the past, these kind of incidents occur. There's usually somebody out there who's going to defend the police, who is going to say this was justified or to give some rationalization for why it's appropriate. I didn't see any of that.
The mayor of New York City and the chief of police of New York City both did.
What? Defended the cops in Minneapolis?
Oh, not the George Floyd killer. Sorry.
No.
I'm talking about the brutality of the past 2 nights.
Yeah, no, right. No, yes. But I mean, like, I'm saying that when you have these kind of high profile.
Yeah, no, even Hannity shootings was like, oh, those seemed a little harsh.
Right. Even Trump actually condemned it before he went off his desired authoritarian mindset to get the hell out of protesters. But I was struck by there was a lot of unanimity around the idea that this was just wrong.
Yeah, I was struck by that too. I've always said the canary in the coal mine is Hannity and Levin and the top right-wing talkers, Tucker Carlson and Rush Limbaugh, and even, unfortunately, people like Alex Jones, who have a lot of influence. And when I saw some of the people I just mentioned saying that this wasn't right, that George Floyd killing in Minneapolis, I thought it meant a lot. It meant something.
It did, and I think that's why also this is not comparable with something like 68, because I think that you have a greater recognition that this kind of thing is unacceptable, and in a way that I don't think was the case 4 or 5 years ago even. And I also was struck by the fact, just how many of these big, like I saw this, the mayor of Atlanta, who's name, is it Bottoms? Her name is escaping me right now.
Keisha Bottoms. I saw your tweet, Bottoms. And it's why I pulled the audio of her to play on the show today.
That was really impressive. Everybody listening to this should pick up that video and find it. It was extraordinary what she said. And what was striking to me was watching that was that this is a black female mayor of Atlanta, and the police chief is a white woman.
Yep.
And you didn't have white women police chiefs in 1968. The police chief in Dallas, I also saw her on TV. She's a woman. You have in many of these cities, you have African American or Latino mayors. The diversity of representation is just a lot different, a lot greater than it was in 1968 or even in 10, 20 years ago. And frankly, look, the demonstration tonight, I would actually say that I'm not exaggerating. I think half the people there were white. I'm not kidding.
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of white faces out there. Yeah, a
lot of white faces out there, and you didn't see that in '68 at all. Not anywhere at the level you're seeing now. So I think this is why it's a little different. This is why it's not I say hopefulness, but I think why this situation is a little different. I'm not so sure that people are uniformly going to say people protesting don't have a point. I think a lot of people out there think they do have a point, and that this George Floyd killing, crossed the line that I think a lot of people, white people especially, say, this can't go on. I mean, I've watched a lot of those videos over the years. That's the worst one I've ever seen.
You think?
Oh my God. Absolutely. I mean, there is not anywhere you can watch that video any rationale for what that cop is doing. None that I can think of. None. I mean, just completely unjustified what he did, and I'm frankly surprised.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of the ones where they shot people were worse in some ways, but actually maybe not, because he just like. I'm not going to defend any of those killings, but they had the thing about that you give the benefit of the doubt to law enforcement, and that how quickly they sometimes have to make decisions. Sometimes
that's exactly the reason.
But this guy held his knee on that guy's neck for 9 minutes, and
exactly. Yeah. And it was clear that there was no reason to. He was lying on the ground. Yeah. There were 3
Eric
cops on top
maybe
of him.
Was another situation.
Eric Garner is the closest one that I can come up with. That was as
because it's a manual kind of hold that they just physically. And I think I also think that there's a lot of symbolism to that position that a lot of people felt, obviously black folks, but just the knee on the neck for so long. It was such a humiliating thing to do to another human being. Did you see his brother, George Floyd's brother on TV?
I did not.
Apparently, I'll play that as well on the show today. But apparently, Trump called him.
Oh, I did see
and didn't
this.
let
Yes,
him say
I did see it.
Didn't let him say anything.
Yeah, well, that's not surprising. That doesn't surprise me at all, because Trump could care less what this person has to say.
Yeah, exactly.
But I just think that, no, I mean, honestly, it was one of the worst things I've ever seen as far as police brutality videos. And I think, near universal criticism of this behavior. Everybody I saw criticized, including Republicans.
I forget who it was that said at first after that video, was it the district attorney or somebody saying, I don't see anything. I'm paraphrasing it. I'm not sure that he did anything wrong. Like, I wonder, because usually what happens in these situations when a police officer is arrested, the next step is a trial. And if they are, vindicated, if they are let off the hook, whatever word you want to say, that's when people go even crazier. So nobody's going to stop protesting or until justice is served in this case. Like, if this guy, my question is, if this cop, Chauvin or whatever his name is, gets let off, all hell's going to break loose, and rightfully so. He's going to be guilty.
I will remind you that Philando Castile was murdered in his car by a white police officer, and they prosecuted him, and he was found not guilty.
Also in Minneapolis, I think.
Also in Minnesota, but not Minneapolis.
That was a horrible one. There's a video of that one, too, in front of his daughter and his girlfriend. Fucking horrific.
Right. Horrific.
All right, bud. Well, I appreciate you hanging out, talking to me tonight. Always great to get your insights. And everybody should follow Michael on Twitter at SpeechBoys71. Subscribe to the Boston Globe, where you can read him, and subscribe to his weekly newsletter, Truth and Consequences, which I always love. Thank you, pal.
Always a pleasure.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Later. There you go, Michael Cohen of the Boston Globe. Follow him on Twitter right now at SpeechBoy71. Tell him you heard him here on the show. Okay, moving on. Now let's head over to one of our all-time favorites, Christine Romans, who is CNN's chief business correspondent. She's also the co-anchor of Early Start. You can see her every morning. I think at 5 a.m. it starts now on CNN. We spoke Friday morning just after the Minnesota State Police had arrested a CNN reporter, Omar Jimenez. He was on TV with Christine just earlier that day. We talked a little bit about that, but mostly we talked about economics and finance and the job numbers that are going to be coming out on Friday. And always great to have Christine Romans joining the conversation. Here it is, your correspondent in Minneapolis on the streets, Omar Jimenez. And what happened during your hour, during your broadcast with his reporting on your show?
It's just amazing the way some of these reporters, their grace under fire is so amazing. And Omar was there. It was dark. It was there was a burning police precinct, another burning building. There were a lot of protesters and people just kind of milling around and watching, but no real violence. And Omar was remarking that over the past few hours, they hadn't seen any police presence, and there was no fire department trying to put that fire out, right? So there was no law enforcement presence on the scene. And he used the word at one point, anarchy. He said, it's really remarkable here. There's just nobody in charge.
Yeah.
And then And then the police came. And when they came, they started interacting. I will use that word. That's a euphemism, really. Interacting with the protesters, spraying mace in their faces, some of them tapping protesters who were departing on the back of their legs, some actually hitting protesters with batons. And things started to get pretty hot. Then by the beginning of the next hour, Omar was reporting, and this line of state police, this huge line of state police came toward him, circled him, and said, you're under arrest. And he said, whoa, tell us where you need us to go. If you're telling us to move, we'll move. And if you watch this video, as I have a million times live, and then since then, they were so professional. Our team was so professional.
Yeah.
And they were arrested for doing their jobs, covering these protests in Minneapolis.
I'm not sure. Maybe the information will come out from the point when we sit down and tape this, or maybe there's something. But were they warned? Were they not warned? Were they not said, move back? You can't be here? It seems like I didn't hear any kind of warning from the state police to the CNN team.
I didn't hear that warning either. And the amazing part about this is all on camera, right? So you can judge for yourself. There's no filter to go through here.
Right.
This is happening all on camera. He stood there and said, we're good. You tell us where you want us to go. We'll go there right now. And that's not what happened. They arrested him, right at the first interaction, they arrested them there. It did not take long. They were released. Our president, CNN's president, called the governor of the state. The governor immediately apologized, said this should not have happened. I take full responsibility. The First Amendment rights and the freedom of the press is what makes America a democracy. I will fix this.
They said, the Minnesota State Police, on their Twitter account, that once they confirmed the credentials of Omar and his team, that they were CNN reporters, they let him go. But of course, all they had to do, Christine, was turn on the television, and they would have seen that he was a reporter. I suppose you could fake your credentials, and maybe they've had an issue with that in the past, but they just had to turn on the TV. I mean, God, can you imagine the embarrassment of that? That there should be from those police, those that arrested him, whoever gave the order, because all they would have to do, if the guy says, I'm on CNN Live, which I believe he did, they could have just turned on CNN on their phones, by the way, or called somebody anywhere that had cable television, which is everybody everywhere, and turn on the TV. This guy is on... flabbergasting.
The optics of arresting, the only arrest being of the journalist, when people are protesting because there hasn't been an arrest of the police officers in the death on the last, that's the crazy thing, that the arrest they make is of the person who's standing there peacefully and calmly reporting the situation.
The other thing that happened on Friday, and just want to get your quick take on this, or last week really, was Twitter basically finally coming forward and saying, we're going to have to do something about the president's tweets. And they started with these fact checks. And then on Friday, the president of the United States tweeted, and I'm paraphrasing, if they start looting, we'll start shooting. And Twitter had censored that tweet and said that...
I wouldn't say censor.
Or
they didn't censor it.
Right.
They let it go. I mean, censor would be to take it down, I think.
You're right.
I think they clarified, and they said, by the way, this does not meet our standards. We don't allow the glorification of violence. That's against our standards. However, we think it's in the public interest to keep this tweet up.
That's right.
Public interest being that the president of the United States said this, so the public has a right to know that he's saying things like this, right? So I think they're really trying to walk a line there. And now you're hearing people talk about fact-checking is censorship. I think that more information is not censorship. More information is more information. And I don't, the other thing is the president is saying that, the conservatives have been maligned and discriminated against by social media platforms. I would disagree 100%. I think the president and his views and conspiracy theories and outlandish claims have had unfettered access to the world because of social media platforms. If anything, it has given a voice to things that never would have had a voice before. So I would completely disagree with the idea that somehow the president's being censored by social media. The president has used social media beautifully to become president.
Maybe beautifully, maybe not the best word, but it's an accurate word. But you're 100% right. Everything you just said, I completely agree with you. At least your take on that. But furthermore, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what the other development was. The president announced some executive order and I don't quite understand how that's going to be enforced and whether or not it's legal, but basically saying that, to pushing back on Twitter. And it just is a wild thing, because for the last few years, right-wing conservatives have been saying that, Twitter is trying to censor free speech. And now the president is basically announcing an executive order that's going to prevent Twitter from operating. I mean, it's just the irony of that order. I think everybody is noticing this week. So I don't think I explained that very well. But anyway, I want to talk with you about a bunch of obviously financial and economic stuff. You being the expert on this. Where are we at, Christine Romans? I mean, we haven't talked in a while, but this pandemic has obviously created the worst economy and job loss in this country and around the world that we've ever seen in our lifetimes, maybe in the history of the country. And it's I don't even know how to begin to talk about framing it. How do you frame where we are at here at the beginning of June?
I think it's really important that you talk about the framing and also the tone, because some people are really freaked out.
Sure.
And they want to know that this is not permanent, that this is a temporary condition as we fight this virus and we figure out how to safely get back to work. I would frame this as we're at the bottom of the canyon right now, right? And now we're trying to figure out the way to crawl out. I hope that this week, it was terrible economic news this week. There'll be terrible economic news next week too. But I hope this is the end of that and you're going to start to see little bits of progress. But you've got millions of people. Think of all the people who were working in the beginning of March. All the people, sorry about this camera, I have it on the stand. Think about all the people at the beginning of March who are working. A quarter of them have lost their jobs. That's just unprecedented, Pete. It's just unprecedented. Now, what we do know is those people who are getting jobless benefits, they have $600 extra a week in extra pay. That's good, but that's going to run out by the end of July. And now Republicans are arguing that that's a disincentive for people to go back to work. So you're going to see some fighting over what the next stage of stimulus is going to look like. Senator Rob Portman and Larry Kudlow and others would like to maybe give people a $450 a week bonus to go back to work when they go back to work, so that there'll be more money for consumers. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to make families whole with this extra money.
What do you think about that argument? We've heard this argument. It's not unique that giving people some kind of assistance, takes away their motivation to go back to work. I think there's some truth to that for some people in some jobs, which allows that argument there to be a grain of truth. But I think the vast majority of people would rather have a job and all that goes with it than the assistance.
I think that in normal times you have that conversation, but now, I mean, people aren't going to go back to work if they feel like they're going to get sick.
Yeah.
People aren't going to go back to work if they have to take care of somebody in their family. People can't go back to work if their kids aren't in school. So I think that, that's a kind of an interesting sort of political conversation, but there are bigger issues this time around. Like, I don't know how families are going to figure out what to do in the fall if kids aren't going back to school, or they're going back to school in shifts or whatever it's going to look like. And you have somebody sick in your family, a relative in your family, you've got a great aunt who now is going to be moving in with your parents because you're afraid to put her in a nursing home. And now the whole family has got to be really careful about where they go. And I mean, there are really big, important questions that are going to be, I think people are more likely not to go back to work for those reasons than for money. Really good points, all of them.
So, and you also said, bottom of the canyon, and hopefully we'll bounce back or something like that. And I just wanted to mention, a lot of people will never bounce back. Just like in 2008, they never, ever got back to any semblance of normal. Some people, we see what happens in these types of economic downturns. A lot of people never, ever bounce back. And when you look at the retail and restaurant industry specifically, and maybe there's some other that you would want to mention, there's a whole bunch of our favorite local establishments that will not come back. Fair to say?
Fair to say. And I think travel, too, is another place where you're going to lose a bunch of different jobs. It's when you get washed out by a recession or you get washed out by a financial crisis, it really sucks. And it's hard to get back in, and people feel left behind. I will say something about this stimulus money, though, that I find really interesting. We've done several stories about people who, for example, waitresses, people who work in Vegas casinos. These are young people who, many of them, who now are getting $600 extra a week that they weren't getting before. And they're using it to pay down their student loan debt, or they're using it to, pay off their car loan, or they're using it to save money for first apartment when they finally get out of their parents' place. So we have found that there are these people out there who are actually trying to leverage this crisis for their own personal finances. This morning, or on Friday, for example, we saw the savings rate in America right now is 33%. Income up 10% because of the stimulus checks and because of unemployment benefits. So people are getting money. They're not spending money. That's why the savings rate is so high. Eventually, we want people to be spending money again. There can't be a recovery without consumers spending. But at least for the right now, I'm seeing people act in a kind of smart way. They're keeping their money in their pockets and in the bank because they're trying to improve their financial situation. And I think that anybody who is doing that right now is going to come out on the other end just fine.
We've also seen a lot of people saving money. My wife and I certainly have saved a lot of money since this started because we can't do anything. And I know this might irk some people listening because they might be spending more money than they normally do. But a lot of people aren't. My daughters aren't going to their dance classes. We're not paying for gas. We're not going out to restaurants. We're not going out to be entertained. I just wonder how many people are their monthly budget, has gone down in terms of expenditures because you can't go anywhere and do anything. I hear that a lot, and I don't know how that.
The numbers show it. The people are spending a lot less, and they're saving their money. And the real hard part about this is the people who are living paycheck to paycheck. There are 53 million people in America who make about $10 an hour. That is real. I mean, so those people hopefully are getting unemployment benefits right now, and that money is making them whole. But what is the job market going to be like for them on the other side of this, right? Will they be able to get a job quickly again? That's why the Republicans want to have this $450 a week extra money for people when they get back, because they just don't want to wash out, some of these retail jobs and some of these restaurant jobs that will come back slowly, but you want to encourage people to try to get back out. So we're really still in the early innings of this. I mean, not to mix my metaphors between a canyon and a baseball game, but we are this is still early. We don't know how this is going to turn out.
I like it when you mix metaphors. I challenge you to do 3. So the other question is how when you look at the stock market and the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange, a lot of these companies are doing well in terms of the markets. Their shareholder value hasn't lost that much, and that doesn't make any sense. I talked with Barry Ritholtz about this week too, and I want to ask you the same question: how can a company show zero earnings and maintain its value in terms of the investor?
Wall Street. Don't you love Wall Street?
No, I do not. I do not.
They're all looking forward to forward earnings. They're all looking to next year, to what the recovery will be like. And, this week, I felt like this was a terrible week for small business. And millions of people are applying for unemployment benefits, 21 million people continuing unemployment benefits. And the stock market is up 30-some% since the March low. The NASDAQ is near a record high. And these FANG stocks, Facebook, Alphabet, Amazon, Google, Apple, these are up really, really sharply, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25%, because the tech part of the economy is impervious to the consumer recession. The rest of the economy is looking forward to the rest of the market rather is looking forward to a sharp rebound next year. I mean, I think they're over optimistic personally, but it's really a highway with 2 different sides. And the real economy is a slow lane, and investors are in the fast lane.
This week, we're going to see job numbers on Friday. What do you predict?
They'll be horrible. We're going to be talking about whether it'll be 20 or 25% unemployment. We'll be able to peel through those numbers and find 100 different ways why they look terrible. The question that I will be asking for Friday is, what percentage of people say their layoffs are temporary? If we can contain this to temporary damage, that's key here. At what point does the temporary layoffs become permanent and start to scar the recovery? So those are the unanswerable questions right now. What will be coming through those charts to look for?
You got to look at this recession, depression, whatever you want to call it, completely differently than any that you've ever covered or even probably studied in school, because this is a disease. This is a virus. It's not the housing bubble. It's not the .com. It's not the savings and loan crisis. It's not, we can go on and on. This is much different, and it would seem a little bit easier to understand and project because when there's a vaccine, herd immunity, if I should say, then things will probably get back quickly based on the underpinnings of what was already the economy before. I would imagine. How do you look at it?
There's no playbook, right? There's no playbook. The financial system is strong. That's why the Chase CEO this weekend said the consumer was strong, the economy was strong, and the financial system was strong heading into here. So he's also predicting a pretty good recovery. I've been trying to think of it like a hurricane that doesn't go away, right? So it's a natural disaster that keeps people in their homes, out of work, with a disruption of all of the normal things around them, like school and grocery stores. But a hurricane then goes offshore and you start to rebuild. Our hurricane is just sitting there without the loss of property, but a different kind of loss. So I try to kind of think of it that way. And then once this storm passes, or at least is just slightly offshore, then we can try to figure out how we are going to rebuild. Problem with this storm is it could come back at any moment.
Yes.
We don't have testing and tracing. I see more, and social media is a terrible judge of this, but I see more people complaining about the government, peeking into their lives than I do about people complaining that we don't have testing and tracing. So we really can't be confident until we have a way to know whether it comes back and what to do when it comes back. And we can quickly protect ourselves. I haven't seen that strategy anywhere.
How much do you look at other countries in the way that they're handling this? Because in Western Europe, it seems that I think Germany and Spain, maybe France, I forget which country. I know Germany. They're basically, the government is paying companies to keep people employed, a tremendous amount of their GDP, like 7% or something like that. And we're not doing anything remotely close. And the pandemic is in many ways similar across the world, and its effect on the economy. Different countries are handling it obviously differently. But as things do change and start to bounce back, hopefully, some of these countries are going to do a lot better because of the way they handled it than ours. How much are you comparing their economic reactions to this to ours?
So I have been doing it a lot, actually, because, in the UK and in Canada, for example, it's direct payroll. So the government has stepped in and paid up to maybe 75 or 80%, directly paid the payrolls of people. So they're getting the exact same paycheck that they would have had. And it's going right into their bank account as it normally would. And that takes the financial disruption out of it for people.
Not to mention the healthcare issue with all of these other countries. And
I talked about this with John Berman one day on the show, because I said, look, we don't do that here in this country. We just absolutely don't. We send people to their state unemployment benefits offices. We've now funded all this extra money, but we make them go through all of this rigmarole to get the money. It's late. You can't get through. It's taken weeks for some people.
Some of that by design, because like in Florida, Rick Scott wanted to make it hard.
Absolutely. They want it to be easier for somebody to go find another job than to get paid unemployment benefits in some places. And Berman laughed at me on the air. He's like, and I said, well, think about how we do it. We do this as more complicated than anybody else. Yeah. The rest of the world is spending the same amount of money, but they're just directly paying the payroll. And he looked at me on the camera and he said, Romans, this is America. That is never going to happen. That is never going to happen. Yeah. It's just not the way our Congress thinks. They just don't think like that. They do not want to have giveaways. They do not want to be socialist. The socialism thing is still, and ironically, you have the government paying people hundreds of dollars a week extra to keep them alive. But a year ago, socialism was like this dirty word in the campaign.
Unless you're a wealthy company, in which case that phrase, what was it, socialism for, the banks all got money, but the rest of us, I forget what that phrase was, socialize the losses, privatize the losses.
Socialize the losses, privatize the gains.
Yeah,
Is that
one.
what it was?
I think that was Something. That one.
I know what you mean.
I'm talking.
Oh, that was a crisis ago. This is a whole new kind of crisis now.
The healthcare issue is a really one that Americans have to worry about, and the rest of the world doesn't, because when you lose your job, you often lose your healthcare, as I did at SiriusXM, and it's a nightmare. My wife and I have had such a difficult time navigating this, and we're educated people with tremendous resources. So as my wife is on the phone for her 100th hour, trying to find the right policy, she just broke down crying. And one of the things she said was, imagine if I didn't speak perfect English, how much harder it would be. Finally, I wanted to just ask you about the future and predictions. I've been talking to a lot of interesting people who are optimistic about certain types of changes in our economy and maybe arguably our society. I talked to a wealthy guy about a $25 minimum wage, Christine. I talked to a journalist about the future of the labor movement. But my main question is to you, what have you seen in terms of there being more leverage for these voiceless workers in America, these people who we completely ignore, we denounce, we criticize, we demonize in terms of immigrants and so on, these people that are now being called essential workers? Do they have more leverage to organize and get better pay and better benefits as a result of this, do you think?
You know, we in this country, we usually squander an opportunity to have real change. We usually squander in a crisis an opportunity to have real change. And that really frustrates me. I do think, though, we have learned here that essential workers, the oxygen of the economy, are people who wear name tags, not people who have diplomas. And I think that companies, the free market is going to start to recognize that, right? You're going to have to pay a little extra to have somebody to keep the turnover low. I mean, I'm hoping that these grocery store companies, Amazon and others, that to keep their labor when this all starts to clear, they're going to have to pay them more, because we know how valuable it is. We know how the disruption to your service can be just devastating for a company. So I'm hoping that this moment illustrates that a little bit better. But yeah, I've been disappointed before.
Just made myself a name tag.
Essential Pete.
Essential Pete. I put a name tag on. Hopefully that'll make a difference for me. I hear what you're saying, and it's a brilliant analysis as always, and I appreciate you joining me, and keep up the good work. How are you doing? Last question. You know, you're still getting up super early in the craziest news cycle of our lives.
Yeah, it is. It's really, but I'm fulfilled by the work. Then I come home and I am a homeschool parent.
Are you going into the studio?
Oh yeah, I go in every day.
Oh, yeah. I thought almost nobody was.
No, we have a few people who go in, and I go in and I'm almost like a man going to Mars. You know, I get into a completely clean car with a back, you know, the back seat is all plexiglass, and I put on a mask and I come through the front door. Everything opens, you know, without me touching it. And they're fumigating things every 10 minutes. And there's only a few of us there, but we're doing broadcasts from, each of us are in different. So I'm on with Laura Jarrett. She's in a little booth. I'm in a little booth. We never see each other or talk to each other. You know, there's no hair and makeup, as you can see, but we just do it. We just do it. We go in and we do it.
You're doing a great job. Wake up early with Christine every morning on CNN, 5 a.m. Eastern. And I always appreciate when you join me. It's great to see you. Thank you.
You too, Pete. Bye.
Awesome to get Christine Romans back on the show. Follow her on Twitter right now at Christine Romans, and let her know that you heard her right here on the podcast, because that's always valuable for me. Love Christine. Okay, my final guest of today's show is a guy named David Rees. He's a fascinating dude who is one of the co-hosts of a new podcast called Election Profit Makers. He is, I guess you can call him a humorist. He's a writer. He's an all-around smart guy. And did you know that you could make bets on politics? I'm not a gambling man, but after this conversation with David Rees, I think I might become one. Seriously, this is some fascinating stuff. I hope you enjoy my conversation, which has a lot of levity and a lot of enlightenment, with David Rees right now. So I guess when I was doing my deep dive into you to prepare to interview you and getting really excited and impressed with your career and your honesty and your humor and your intellect, I guess I just wasn't expecting that mustache. That is a new thing. Is it a pandemic stash? Or what are we doing?
This is my plague mustache. Thank you for noticing. Mm-hmm. This is I guess a fuzzy caterpillar that I hope when all this is over will turn into a beautiful butterfly. And it is a daily reminder to myself that things could always be worse.
How would you describe it to listeners? You and I are talking on Zoom, and I'll post the video.
This is the classic white guy, fuzzy wuzzy. It's
thick, though.
It's thick, and I've decided the decision I made last week was, I've made the bold decision. I've never made this decision before with a mustache. I'm not going to trim it. I'm just going to let it curl under into my mouth, which I guess is bad for COVID, because I think facial hair...
COVID gets right in there. Yeah, COVID gets right in there, yeah.
But, you know, I'm eating a lot of lentils these days. And so when times are tight, it's always good to make sure no food is going to waste, and that if it's getting caught in mustache hairs that you can later
savored. Yeah, that's a good point. So, let the stash marinate in it. Now, aren't you married?
Right. Yeah.
Does your wife get a say in such a bold facial hair choice? She does not.
Every person for themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And you don't say anything about if she wants to grow out anything.
If she grows a mustache, that's fine. We all have to do what we have to do in these troubling times.
You are a really interesting guy. You've had an interesting career and life, and you're now, along with two other friends of yours, John and Starley, hosting this podcast, Election Profit Makers. How do you explain what you guys are doing on your podcast?
Election Profit Makers is a podcast about betting on political outcomes. So our first season was during the 2016 election, when my friend John, we grew up together in North Carolina. I had called him, I guess, in the spring of 2016 just to ask him what he was up to these days. And he said, I'm making all this money betting against Trump supporters on this website called predictit.org, which is an online betting market. You can use real money, and you place bets on contracts about things in the news. It is technically, it's online gambling, but it's legal because it's an Australian academic study in kind of the wisdom of crowds. And if betting markets are a more accurate predictor of future events than traditional public polling.
There's some utility to predict it. To this type of gambling, there's some utility as opposed to traditional gambling where there is not. I mean, I guess maybe you could study other behaviors or something, but you're okay. So the podcast then every episode talks about the different bets that you are making.
Yeah, it's kind of like we're talking about, current events and all the wonderful things that we're blessed enough to experience these days.
Well said.
But we use it through the lens of these political markets. So, for instance, with coronavirus, which I'm sure you and your listeners are aware of, it's a big news event these days. They don't have.
Yeah, I've heard of it mentioned, but I haven't followed that. Yeah.
It's kind of blowing up. It's kind of a meme now. Yeah. You should look into it.
I don't pay attention to whatever you say. What do you say, a virus, until it kills 1 million people. That's when I really start.
Right.
Yeah.
You might if all goes well, you might never hear about it.
Well, that'd be great.
You might never reach it. Yeah. But for those of us who are kind of like deep in the weeds of like the most esoteric, wonky stuff, we've heard about this thing, the coronavirus.
Go ahead. Yeah.
And for instance, one of the related markets on Predictit is whether the Democratic convention, which has already been pushed from July to August, will actually take place in Milwaukee at the Fiserv Forum, or whatever the name of the place is.
But the thing I guess I don't understand about Predictit and about making these bets is how often one can be proven right or wrong. Like these are things that only are going to have definitive outcomes at a primary, at a convention, on November 3rd. Are there ways to make bets that you can win or lose daily, weekly, monthly?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Here, let's do this.
Okay.
Let's take a look at my current portfolio. And this will give you a sense of the different types of bets that are available.
And I'm also on their website, predictit.org, right?
Yep, predictit.org. So there are all types of markets, and they're not all related to elections or primaries. So for instance, and this will actually help me explain something else, which is, are you going to use Predictit as an investment strategy or as a wishing well? And I'll explain what I mean in a moment. So I grew up in North Carolina. North Carolina currently has a Republican Senator, Richard Burr, who is under investigation by the FBI for accusations of basically insider trading on coronavirus news that he was able to get ahead of everybody else because obviously he was the chair of the Senate Intel Committee.
Which is pretty much the most important part of his career as a senator, is that he's the chairman of a very powerful Intel Committee, the committee which has all of the secrets, or should.
Has all the juicy stuff. Right.
So not somebody that you would expect to make,
right.
A trade or an insider trade, especially.
They get the director's cut of all the intel that we later hear about.
Yeah.
So obviously Trump hates him because Burr, was involved in the Russia stuff and actually, had Don Jr. come in to testify. Obviously, Trump hates him for that. Burr also got a lot of briefings about the coronavirus. And while he was telling his constituents there was nothing to worry about, he was also making a ton of stock trades, and he profited based on those trades when the virus hit. So there is a market right now on Predict It. Will Richard Burr be a U.S. Senator on July 1st?
Oh.
Okay. So that's a market that's going to resolve on July 1st. And if Richard Burr is still a U.S. Senator, every share you bought of yes will pay out at $1. If he is not a U.S. Senator on July 1st, every share you bought of no, which is what I bought, will pay out at $1. Now, he's probably still going to be a senator on July 1st, right? He's not going to get indicted or resign in disgrace or fall into a hole and break his neck and no longer be a senator. But I hate this guy so much that I just had to put my money where my mouth was and buy shares of no. He will not be a senator on July 1st. And keep in mind that for any given investment you make and Predict It, you can buy and sell those shares whenever you want. It's like a stock market, so you can ride waves. I used to have shares that Amy Klobuchar would be Joe Biden's vice presidential pick. And then I thought better of it and just sold them. I sold them at a loss. I just wanted to get out before they resolved to zero. But you can do that, all day long. Just,
I wonder
on
who
the
does,
rumors. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder who does better. Someone who's a total political junkie like me and has been and covered this stuff for over 10 years, or someone who has no idea about anything, which is how fantasy football sometimes works.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different. If you go into the comments section of Predict It, you'll realize it's like anything else on the internet. There are many different types of people there.
Yeah,
and obviously, when you read the comments, it's also really hard to tell if someone is being sincere or somebody is trying to just move a market.
Oh, right. And
increase their position of pump and dump or false information or something. So
you can't say pump and dump on the podcast.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I will
thought
say
you were
inflate or extricate.
Well done, sir. Well done.
Yeah, that's college man's pump and dump.
Yeah, that is good stuff. You're quite the writer as well. But yeah.
So if there's a breaking news story, people will panic and go crazy and the markets, a single market will explode. And sometimes if you hop in and hop off at the right time, you can turn a profit, maybe within the course of a few hours.
So you've told me 2 bets that you've made, both of which I disagree with. Have you done well? What was your bet on 2016? I bet you a lot of people lost a lot of money. I mean, that's the only bet I know a lot of people lost a lot of money. So take me through that night.
Okay. Let me see if I haven't completely blacked that night out of my memory. So let's see what happened. So in 2016, my friend John was making hundreds of dollars betting against Trump supporters in the summer because the Trump supporters on Predict It were so into Trump that they just bet on Trump for everything. And John just kept shorting Trump and was making a lot of money right up until election night 2016, when John lost, obviously, thousands of dollars. He lost thousands of dollars on who would win the presidential election. He lost thousands of dollars on who would win certain swing states. He was in for Clinton in North Carolina and Wisconsin and blah, blah, blah. None of that worked out, actually. So we quit the podcast the day after the election. It was our final episode.
Man.
Because he got wiped out. And it was a real bummer. And we didn't want to think about politics. But then with this election coming up, it was like, let's get our money back. Let's get our revenge. So John is up. John is good at this. John also spends more time on the website than I do. I am down overall, but I can justify some of my bets, even the bets that are underwater. I think in my mind, there's a certain brilliant logic to some of these positions I'm holding. And I will not apologize. Well, I'll apologize for betting on Burr. That was just my heart talking. But when I get really analytical,
I
think some of these bets make sense. For instance,
I'll
give you another one. Here's another controversial bet. Mike Pence. Will Mike Pence be the 2020 Republican nominee for vice president? What would you say, first of all?
First of all, that's a really good one. I like it a lot. And I think the conventional wisdom would be, yeah, sure. But conventional wisdom doesn't apply to this man because I think he's very unpredictable. Maybe you would disagree with that, but I think he's very unpredictable. I think his behavior changes, his tastes change, and obviously his loyalty changes. He has no loyalty to anybody. He's not even familiar with his daughter, Tiffany. I don't think he knows that she is his daughter. But so I think that if things are really bad and he's looking to, in October, shake things up, he could let Pence go. But I still think Pence brings him the evangelical vote. He is a member of, the family and all that. And he's such a suck up. It's hard to believe he even has a beating heart. So I'd say that he is still the vice president.
So everything you're saying makes total sense. Let me explain why you're wrong.
Go ahead.
COVID hasn't gone that well for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Trump loves a scapegoat, right?
I see where you're going.
He loves to throw people under the bus. I think that's when he feels the most powerful. I put
Mike in charge of the COVID task force. I thought he'd be able to do a good job. Unfortunately, as you can see, we've had 200,000 deaths. Mike has served me well, but he really dropped the ball here. That's why
he failed like a dog.
He failed like a dog. That's
very
why
sad.
I'm bringing in, for my vice president now, Magneto.
I thought you were going to say Jared Kushner.
Well, you tell me what's going to happen. And who does he bring in?
Right.
First your joke answer, which in this world could be, if it's like I picked a person who's not real. So you should have to pick a real person because it could be that person. Anybody from Sean Hannity to Joe Arpaio to
right,
Geraldo.
Or he could go to Jared and say, Jared, your new name is Magneto. Take this purple paint and put it all over your body and just tell everyone you're Magneto.
It's the kind of joke you write.
33% of the country will go along with it. They'll believe it.
The kind of joke you write to be absurd, and then you're like, you wouldn't write that joke because you just wouldn't,
right.
But it would be too far-fetched. But it's like, wait, oh my God, what the fuck is Jared covered in purple paint for?
Right, exactly. The collapse of far-fetchedness has been one of the most exhausting things about the last few years.
I want everybody to meet Thanos. Thanos, come on out, Thanos. Josh Brolin, confused. He's got a ring. So what's the bet? What do you think?
So here's my position. I thought, this is what I thought. Call me crazy, but I thought President Trump is not up to the task of handling this worldwide pandemic, right? I know it's a very controversial thing to think, but I said it, okay? He's not going to do a good job with this COVID thing. So I thought he put Pence in charge of it, and Pence can be thrown under the bus if he, these latest polls are not good for Trump. If he does have to shake things up, and if he can't fall back on his plan of just having the National Guard shoot every black protester across the country, maybe he'll do something like drop Mike Pence for Nikki Haley or something. You know what I mean? Or for Diamond and Silk. Maybe he'll run Diamond and Silk as co-vice presidents. So I bought shares of No. I paid 17 cents per share. I was like, that seems like a fair price, given, like you said, how unpredictable and insane everything is. I am now underwater because now no's are only 14 cents. Yes is 86 cents, which means that collectively, Predicted says there's an 86% chance that Mike Pence actually will be the 2020 Republican nominee for vice president. And you said something that I wish I had thought of before I made this bet, actually. See, now you're making me insecure about my wisdom, which is that Trump craves loyalty and obedience,
right?
And this kind of abject humiliation at his feet. That to him is like the highest. That is the highest virtue.
Yeah,
a man
for sure.
Can achieve.
For sure. Yeah.
And the amazing thing about Pence is just how utterly spineless and cucked he is in Trump's presence. So maybe he'll outlast everyone. And the other thing that Pence is really good at, unlike Steve Bannon and unlike some of these other people, is he'll stay in the shadow,
Right.
Like he is not an attention whore the way someone like Steve Bannon is. You can't put an image of Mike Pence as the puppet master controlling Trump's strings that Trump sees and gets triggered and decides to fire him because he's intimidated.
Bannon's a bad example because you can, Bannon hosts a radio show. I should tell you the story someday about the fact that we shared a studio every day at SiriusXM. Me and Steve Bannon back to back. I'd walk in, he'd walk out. Hey, Pete. Hey, Steve. I got stories. Nothing great.
Smell of sulfur still in the air.
All those jokes I already made. I'd had the garlic up, a crucifix up. But no, I would submit for your argument to swap out Bannon and swap in Fauci, who is not a guy who's interested in attention, but who Trump said, he's getting more famous than me. Maybe it's time for Fauci.
Speaking of which, there was a lot of activity in the Fauci markets unpredicted.
What is the bet on Fauci? His firing?
The current market, this is related to the Pence market. Will Anthony Fauci be the director of the NIAID on June 1st? And right now, it's trading at 99 cents. So it's basically a foregone conclusion, which is interesting because months ago, these same types of markets, which I think are always resetting, like will he be the director on April 1st? What about May 1st? And now, obviously, it's June 1st. They just keep hunting it, right? But as time has gone on, there's been a lot less volatility as people have realized, okay, if he hasn't dumped Fauci by now, he's not going to dump him within the next month. But when this relationship first started and when Fauci first was becoming a public figure and everyone was like, oh, Fauci, he's going to be the new Bob Mueller. He's going to save us from the big crazy orange man. There was a lot of volatility because people thought, oh, Trump's not going to be able to tolerate the fact that Fauci is more famous than him.
Right.
But now it feels like that is that dynamic is now baked in.
Well, he's not bringing him out anymore because of that, probably, because Fauci insists on saying insane things like testing is important.
Right. Yeah.
This is crazy. I'm looking at the all the different bets. What do we call them? Wagers, premises.
Wagers, bets, investments.
And I hate gambling. I think it's stupid because I have kids and it seems like I'm giving away their money, their futures. But I mean, when I used to do stand up in casinos, I could lose all the money on the way back to the room. But so I could never, do that. But this is like, I know politics pretty well and I'm pretty good at predictions. And I'm going to make my first bet. Thank you to you and your podcast. So, and it's going to be on the who Joe Biden picks to be his running mate.
Well, this is obviously a hugely popular and volatile market right now. So before I tell you my history with this market, tell me, who are you buying and at what price?
Well, I don't have a choice I have a choice on the price. I'm buying Kamala Harris, which sounds horrible as a phrase. And right now it's at 38 cents.
Wow, look, Val Demings is really coming up.
Yeah. Well, she's getting a lot of talk, but yeah. She might be too dark-skinned for America. And I'm not even fucking kidding. It's like Obama was, half white. And it's like, I do feel like there's a lot of unfortunate truth to that. So, but nonetheless, Val Demings has been great in Congress. I don't know that much about her, but, he's being really, really pushed into picking a woman of color. And now that Klobuchar is out because whether or not it's true, she may have missed a chance to prosecute the cop who murdered this guy. So I think it's Kamala Harris. I'm betting on that.
That's what I would bet on.
Yeah.
I think that's the safest bet. And I think this is a situation where the conventional wisdom seems right to me. You know what I mean? Maybe that's why it's conventional wisdom. But it's like when you look at the other names, I can't see him picking Klobuchar now. I used to have a position in Klobuchar because we had a 12-year-old guest on our show who's the son of one of my friends who is a huge Joe Biden centrist. We found an actual Joe Biden bro, and he was totally into Klobuchar. He thought she just was the right person for the job, and he convinced me to buy Klobuchar. And then I think it was either yesterday when the stuff about her not prosecuting the cop came out, or maybe a couple days before, I was like, why did I listen to a child? Yeah. Nobody is going to It's not going to be Klobuchar. So I sold my Klobuchar. Then my co-host Starlee had a DC insider sending her information saying it's going to be Warren. It sounds crazy, but it's going to be Elizabeth Warren because Joe Biden's wife, Jill, does not like Kamala Harris. I was like, really? I'm not sure that's enough to convince me to get in on Warren, even though I would be happy with Warren as vice president.
You know who Joe Biden's wife does like, and you know who America likes, and who there is a bet you could place on predictit.org. And finally, David, who a DC insider friend of mine said is going to be the pick.
Who's that?
I think I have a drum roll sound effect. No, that's not it. No. Anyway, it's Michelle Obama. Are you familiar with her work?
I am. In fact, I bought 20 shares of no and Michelle Obama when for some reason, this is what I mean about Predicted sometimes being a wishing well. The fact that people were buying shares in Michelle Obama being the vice president, to me, that's insane. She's not going to be the vice president. Her whole brand is, I can't stand politics.
Yeah.
Get me out of this world.
Well, furthermore, the one thing that I don't know if she talked about in her book, I watched the Netflix documentary. I think it's called Becoming. I think the book is the same title. And a thing she never talks about, but a thing you know is true for every single president and the first lady, is that every day, especially if you're the first black one, she had to worry every day about her kids being killed. Like how she functioned, how she figured out how to cognitively function as well as she did with that, dealing with that every day, is something that probably she'll never want to talk about, and rightfully so. But you wish, just because of the salaciousness or the interest in it, that she would. But that's a thing. She doesn't want to put her family literally in harm's way again. And she's like, we did our job. We did our service. That's it. There's no way. So I would bet on no. If that's, you can make a wager. There's no way that Michelle Obama will do this. And I should also mention a lot of my political insight right now comes from watching Designated Survivor starring Kiefer Sutherland, which I must say to you right now is one of the worst shows I have ever not been able to stop watching.
No way. You're telling me Designated Survivor starring Kiefer Sutherland isn't one of the greatest TV shows ever made?
Let's just say it's no 24.
All right. Has that been your comfort watching? Or
the last 2 weeks I started watching it, and it has been at the end of the night when I'm done with my 12-hour days of hosting and producing a daily podcast and editing it and promoting it. I will turn on all my other choices, I will say, have been more highbrow, including even Netflix's Waco. Do you think, staying on this road, after watching Waco, David Koresh apparently told the male members of his cult, basically, I'm the only one who can fuck the women, and you can't even have sex with your own wife. Do you think if Donald Trump, I wish this were a wager, they would never put this up on Predictit, came to his hardcore supporters and knocked on the door and said, listen, I'm gonna fuck your wife. Do you think they'd be okay with it? What would you buy or sell that?
Well, I mean, it all depends on where the stock is priced. So the market would say, if Donald Trump knocked on the door of a Donald Trump supporter and announced he was going to make coitus with said supporter's spouse, parentheses, assuming spouse is female, comma, i.e. a wife, would supporter agree to aforementioned demand? I would pay. I mean, yeah, because what you're asking me is this guy running a cult? And I think for many people, the answer is yes.
Yeah,
it is indistinguishable these days from a cult.
Yep.
And I actually, like a lot of people, I'm pretty interested in cults. So when you go through the benchmarks for a cult, we have demanding that you cut off contact from people outside of the cult. Restricting news information, restricting flow of information from the out group to the in group. We have that with fake news, right? We have that with don't trust the media, only listen to me, only believe me. The cult has garb that visually sets it apart from everybody else. We have our red MAGA hats, right?
And our Trump flags. My neighbor has a flag on a flagpole with
Trump Pence flags. Yeah, totally. All that stuff. So I'd buy that at 20 cents, but no more than 20 cents.
How come there are wagers here where, you know, it seems like it would be a guarantee or a lock, including will the Democratic VP candidate be a woman? You know, Joe Biden, I think I saw that one. Joe Biden has promised and guaranteed, will 2020 Dem VP nominee be a woman? Yes, 27 cents, no, 3 cents. I mean, why would they even put that up there? Who would be taking that bet, seeing as that, you know, politics is just different. It's different than anything else, where if he made this promise, as Joe Biden has, that it would be a woman, he's not going back on that, David. I would go, I mean, I'm pretty fair to say.
I think if Barack Obama came to Joe Biden and said, Joe, you know, I've been giving it a lot of thought. I kind of miss the White, like Michelle's going to kill me for saying this, but I kind of miss the White House. And if you wanted me to be your VP, I would be happy to do it. I think Joe Biden would.
I think it's wrong. I think you're wrong. I think he would say no. Unfortunately, I think even if Abe Lincoln came back from the dead.
Wow.
Yeah.
You think he would choose a woman over the ghost of Abraham Lincoln? Was he a ghost or a zombie?
He's a ghost. Don't be a dick.
So it's just a spirit. It's the spirit of Abe Lincoln. It's not a physical. Embodied Abe Lincoln. That's gonna. I mean, because Joe Biden could come out tomorrow and say, "Great news! My vice presidential pick is the spirit of Abe Lincoln." You can't see him, but he's standing right here.
Well, it's crazy.
He's not available for interviews, but trust, this is the spirit of Abe Lincoln. He's my running mate.
All you see is a floating mask.
Yeah, or floating top hat, floating mask.
Wow. Is there any mask bets?
No, because the interesting thing about this,
like, will Trump wear a mask at the Ford plant or something like that? Would be a fair.
That was our fantasy bet, and we all would have lost money on it because I was convinced he would never wear a mask, and that one was kind of splitting hairs because he only wore it privately. You know, he can't.
But he did.
I can't imagine he would ever wear one publicly because it would just be admitting defeat, right? Isn't that what the culture war about the masks is? Wearing a mask is a admission that the virus is a real thing and not a hoax by George Soros and Bill Gates.
Well, there's that. And then there's also, I think, another thread of that. It makes you weak.
Right.
You're less tough. You're not as macho. I mean, wearing a mask.
If we can't see
masks are for
Donald
pussies.
Trump's beautiful puckered lips look like a duck's butthole, then he looks weak. But that's the crazy thing. Masks can look tough. Why is everyone so afraid of Antifa? Because they wear black masks. They look tough. If Trump came out wearing a black mask and a black hoodie, then he would look tough.
If he had
he would wear the mask.
If he had any sense of humor and courage, he would come out in a white hood and be like, "That's it. Let's just put all the cards on the table."
Right.
If
nice
I'm going to wear
white mask, white hood.
Yeah. Well,
although the hood, you don't need the mask.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
Klan hoods are COVID approved. They're COVID safe.
Some guy, I did see a picture. Some guy at a grocery store wore a Klan hood a couple weeks ago.
I saw that too. That was lovely. It's a great country we have here.
Yeah. And I called my dad up. I was like, "Dad, that wasn't you." He's got a sick sense of humor. I kid you, Pop. All right. So this is a fascinating idea, betting on politics, and that there's a market for it, and that it's somehow legal, and that you have a podcast dedicated to it, which airs weekly.
Yeah, the episodes come out on Tuesdays.
And people should look up wherever you get your podcasts, Election Profit Makers, and listen to David and his hilarious. It's very funny. I listened to an episode last night. You got great guests. And you've been in this game. I don't even know what you want to call your career, but certainly you've been involved in comedy for a long time. And therefore you have a lot of access to, great people. John Hodgman wrote the forward to your book. And, you had Paul F. Tompkins on and Jenna Friedman on, who I know both, and, great comedian. So it's a great show, great guests,
Thank you,
and
Pete.
great
I really
subject matter.
That.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm not done with you though, because I want to ask you, I watched in my prep to interview you, this presentation that you gave. Where was it? The XO. What was this? Where you talked about your income of every year for like 10 years, and you had like a PowerPoint presentation of how you made money. And it was like, rarely am I really drawn into a video, like even a TED Talk. And it was similar to a TED Talk, but it was so I can't. It was so honest and vulnerable.
It was
and
scary.
Funny. And you put up
scary to do.
Yeah, there were a lot of like things, that you did to make money that were tough. The tough stuff there, David. I mean, why? Tell me about that, because I want people to go watch that, because I thought it was a really interesting thought exercise and brave to do. I was you've done a lot of really impressive things in your career, but that I really enjoyed that. Thank
you. That was a festival called the XO. Is it the XO Festival or the XOXO
like 2015,
Festival?
I think it was.
Yeah, it's a tech. It's like a tech festival, but it's kind of like about creativity and personal stuff. And so when they asked if I would give a talk, they said, we really like our lecturers to like do something that scares them a little and is a little like personal. And it's not just like, here's how to use Photoshop to monetize your brand, but something a little deeper than that.
And enough about Gary V.
Right.
Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, of course. My friends own a wine shop. They were totally into Gary V.
Can we talk about him for 4 hours? Go ahead.
So I thought, all right, what would be scary to talk about? Well, I guess I could talk about how much money I make. And so I've been a freelancer, I guess, since 2002. 2002 was when I started to earn an income from my political cartoons. I used to be a political cartoonist.
Yep.
So for the past 18 years, I've been a freelancer. So yeah, I went through a gig worker. Yeah. The wonderful gig economy that we're all fortunate.
Yeah, I just entered it in October. It's really
wonderful.
fun. It's fun.
No security, no pensions. It's all about innovation and disruption. It's great for heart health and headaches.
Yeah, it's really a good thing for heart health. The American Cardiology Institute.
Yeah.
I don't know why I didn't say Heart Association. Go ahead. Sorry.
So, I went through all my old spreadsheets and just made a graph of how much money I've made just to show people what it was like.
I wish everybody did that. It was so interesting to see that, because I was studying your career and the things you've done, and I was evaluating that, as I do. I do that with people in that are even tangentially remotely in my world. I'm like, I wonder how much money he did. I wonder if he got paid for that book. I wonder what he gets for speaking. I wonder what.
Yeah.
I do it every time. Almost every guest I talk to, I think about those things, and I just love that you did that. I'll link to that video in the show notes because it was so brilliantly done. But before, I also wanted to ask you, though, you kind of made your big splash back, as Rolling Stone, with your cartoons, and they were basically all about the Iraq War.
Yeah, I had this comic. It started online in October of 2001. It was called Get Your War On, and it was all clip art. It was just guys yelling on the phone to each other. So it started with the bombing of Afghanistan. It started with Operation Enduring Freedom, and then a book came out, and I toured around the country, and then Rolling Stone hired me to do the cartoon for Rolling Stone magazine. And that obviously, I think, was in 2003. So then obviously a lot of it was about the Iraq War because we invaded in March of 2003. And I did that cartoon through Bush's presidency, and then I quit because I knew once Obama was in office, all problems would magically disappear, and we would usher in a golden age where everything I wanted to happen happened.
So last question here on that. I just saw my daughter run through, and I realized
I thought that was a ghost.
I gotta go.
That was the ghost of Abraham Lincoln.
But wait a second. Might have been. He comes by. So I just wanted to ask you how you look back on that and on the war specifically. We got to go? Okay. Final question, because it's so important that that people don't forget how horrifying that was of a decision. What would you say about your work then, what you were saying, and how you look back on it?
I've been thinking about that a lot recently.
Oh, good.
Because up until coronavirus, I think Trump is a uniquely despicable and disgusting person. But when you actually, this is going to sound disgusting as well, but when you
I know what you're going to say.
Yep. When you run the numbers, Bush has more blood on his hands, and so it's stomach churning when Bush hands Michelle Obama a breath mint or hangs out with Ellen in a skybox, and even Democrats are like, oh, Bush, remember when Republicans were normal? It's like, are you fucking insane? This dude is a total war criminal.
Yep.
Put aside Katrina, right? Put aside trying to fucking privatize Social Security. This dude, hundreds of thousands of people who did not need to die died because of this idiot, right?
More.
Yeah. So I think about it a lot because it's like he was bad news. And people who look back on him fondly are either in denial or maybe they were too young to remember the Iraq War, remember John Yoo, the torture shit, Abu Ghraib, all that stuff. So I don't know.
Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo Bay, all of it. Yeah, torture.
Yeah, totally.
I'm glad that you said that because it's like as I was prepping, I covered a lot of that. I feel like I read every book and interviewed so many different authors and military people and Iraqis. And it was just like it was a really important part of my career covering that and talking about it. And I'll never forget it. And I was against it from the very start, as any I felt like at the time sane person should be. And that was from someone who was in New York on 9/11, as you were. I know.
Yeah. And I was in Brooklyn.
A lot of people wanted revenge. And I was like, well, what about those of us that actually suffered the most and lost people? Do we, shouldn't our say matter? And it didn't seem to as much. But anyway,
I agree.
I love talking to you, man. I love your podcast. And
Thank you, Pete. I really appreciate you having me on.
I hope all my listeners will stop listening to my podcast and only listen to yours. That's how generous I am.
Come on in. The water's fine. Come make money with the election profit makers.
His podcast is called Stand Up with Pete Dominick. Election profit makers, everybody. David Rees, thank you so much, man. Really great getting to know you. I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. It was a pleasure.
All right, there you go. Sorry about the interruptions from my daughter. She really needed me to take her to one of those drive-by birthday party things, which, by the way, they have like businesses. Do you have these in your community where somebody owns these giant lawn letters that say happy birthday and you spell the kid's name out and you can get like pictures and stuff? They come and they drop them off on the day so that you can drive by and wish people a happy birthday with distance. And then they come and they pick the letters up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what a fascinating entrepreneurial idea. People really do adapt to the times. I wonder if that thing is going to last after this is over, if it's ever over. Did you forget? There's a pandemic going on. Yeah. Keep distancing. Okay, folks, that's it. Thanks so much for tuning in to the podcast today. Tell your friends about it. I've got some amazing guests coming up this week. Tiffany Cross, Laura Coates, and a lot more folks. We're going to talk about racial injustice in America, and I'd really love to hear from you, your thoughts on everything that's happening. You can email me. You can leave me a message and a whole number of places. I got to get a voicemail number. Or you could just send me a voice memo. Do you know how to make a voice memo? Send me voice memos and I'll play your messages on the air. But I just got to do another full listener hour or two. Coming up this week, get some special guests on. Let me know who you want to hear. Thank you for listening. Sign up for a paid subscription. This podcast is done daily. This is what I'm doing now. So check it out at the show notes here or go to patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Okay. That's it. Thank you so much for checking it out today. Tell your friends and know that you are not alone no matter what is going on. You are not alone. I love you. I'm here for you. And I look forward to talking to you. And I'll talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up.